Close your eyes and take a deep breath. Today, I invite you into a story that echoes across thousands of years, a narrative that flows not only from the verses of Homer, but from the very deepest currents of the human spirit. This is not just the saga of a hero, it is the eternal story of resilience, faith, and the enduring power of the soul. In this epic, the sea itself is destiny. The wind whispers the capricious will of the gods, and amid the relentless waves, one man, a king, battles against the fury of the heavens, the wrath of the oceans, and the tempests within his own heart to find his way home. O Muse, ancient source of all inspiration! If a tale is to be told that touches the profoundest layers of the human experience, a tale that can rebuild the lost splendor of that Bronze Age in the listener's mind, it must be the story of that singular man who fought not only with the might of his arm, but with the infinite labyrinth of his mind. He is the most intricate, the most human face of the Mycenaean era. That magnificent age of bronze armor, sharp blades, and demigods that laid the foundation for civilization. He is the living embodiment of Metis, cunning, strategy, and patience, qualities sharper than any sword and more tenacious than fate itself. Odysseus, the King of Ithaca. Disclaimer: the visuals in this video were created using artificial intelligence. There are no bloody or excessively graphic scenes. However, some moments have been designed for cinematic and emotional depth. If you are sensitive to such imagery, please consider this before watching. If you wish to join me on these legendary journeys, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, turn on the notification bell, and leave a comment below telling me which story you would like to hear next. I look forward to exploring these timeless tales together with you on every adventure. Take another deep breath, relax your mind, and let the rhythm of the waves guide you, wishing you a peaceful sleep. The epic journey begins now. Odysseus, listen and heed. This narrative begins in the immediate wake of the Great 10-Year War, just after the walls of Troy had crumbled into ash and the smoke had shrouded the sky. If you haven't heard our previous story on the Trojan War, you can find it on my channel. This is the journey of a hero's homecoming, the epic of solitude, trial, unyielding faith, and a human heart forged by hope. It is a quest across the seas, amidst the unpredictable games of the gods, and at the very edge of time. The story of one man finding his way back to his homeland through the perilous labyrinth of his own soul. This tale has echoed across the centuries, carried by the breath of Homer, the voices of bards, and the shadows of olive trees. It has been passed down from lip to lip, sometimes like a dream, sometimes like a prayer. As the cool, salty Aegean winds beat upon the shores of the 8th century BC, a new dawn was breaking in human history. Marble columns had not yet risen, nor had philosophy been born. Yet, the light of the alphabet was beginning to spread, and the magic of the word was finally being poured onto papyrus and parchment, transforming into an immortal legacy. It is at this critical juncture that the blessed verses of the blind poet Homer sprang to life. The Iliad and the Odyssey were far more than simple epics. They were monuments, sacred texts that forever shaped the conscience of Western culture and laid the foundation for its ancient sense of morality. The world they described so carefully was not just a memory of the past. It was a pale yet always idealized reflection of Mycenaean civilization, a world of shining bronze armor, of gods whose shadows stretched long across the earth, where war itself had become a ritual. The heroes of that age were more than strong warriors. They embodied honor, boundless courage, and above all, a clever, many-sided intelligence, Metis. Their strength did not lie only in their arms, but in the twists of their minds along the steep and winding paths of life and death. They did not only swing swords, they also sharpened the blade of their intellect over and over. From the heart of this glorious heritage rose Odysseus, destined for the throne of Ithaca, a nest of eagles perched among jagged cliffs and surrounded by the stormy waters of the Aegean. His presence and spirit were different from other heroes who relied on raw strength and anger. Unlike Achilles or Aias, who trusted in their arms and the edge of their spears, Odysseus was known for his mind. He adapted to challenges like flowing water and was famous for his versatile cunning, Metis, suitable for every trial. His fame and wisdom reached far beyond the Achaean councils, even to the thrones of Olympus, where the goddesses themselves admired him. Long before the shadow of the Trojan War fell over the Aegean, Odysseus had already won the heart of the fair Penelope, known for her patience and loyalty. He made her his wife, even amid the many suitors of his cousin, Helen of Sparta. But danger arose among the suitors, whose rivalry threatened to ignite conflict. To the worried Tyndareus, Odysseus offered a wise solution: the oath of Tyndareus, binding all Achaean leaders together. This was no simple promise. It was a sacred covenant sealing fate itself. Helen's marriage and her future husband would be protected through every trial and difficulty. When Helen was taken by the reckless Prince Paris of Troy, the Achaeans were bound by that oath. Through Odysseus's persuasion, the oath was renewed, and the loyalty of the greatest warriors was secured. The vast Achaean fleet rested not only on swords and spears, but on the unseen power of words and honor. Yet Odysseus longed to avoid the 10 years of ruin that war would bring. Neither bloody victory nor tragic defeat mattered compared to the peaceful life of Ithaca, the warmth of home, and the bonds of family. His love for his infant son Telemachus, still in his cradle, for Penelope, whose devotion shone like a lamp, and for the stony cliffs of his homeland, outweighed all the treasures and fame of Troy. With these thoughts, Odysseus devised one of the strangest deceptions in history. He pretended to be mad. In front of the people, he yoked 2 animals that could never work together, a horse and an ox, to his plow, and he sowed his fields with salt, as if expecting a harvest from the sea. But cunning was not his alone. Among the Greeks, Palamedes, sharp of mind, saw through the ruse. To test the truth, he placed the infant Telemachus in front of Odysseus's plow. The father's instinct, deep and eternal, overcame all deception. Odysseus turned the plow aside, and in that moment his madness was exposed. He had no choice but to join the call to war. Yet this was no simple defeat. From that day on, his resentment toward Palamedes for endangering his son became one of the darkest and most complicated passions of his life, a quiet warning of the cunning vengeance he would one day exact. During the 10 bloody years at Troy, Odysseus was not just a shield-bearer or a spear-thrower. He was a diplomat, a strategist, and the force that kept the Achaean army together. He was known for his foresight in dangerous moments. When panic seized the Greeks and they ran toward their ships, Odysseus, staff in hand, rallied them, restored their courage, and saved the army from collapse. His skill in finding resources, negotiating difficult matters, and understanding human nature shaped the course of the war. He was not only the mind behind the Trojan horse, that brilliant act of cunning. He also gathered the heroes essential for victory. He found Achilles, hidden by his divine mother Thetis on the island of Skyros, disguised as a maiden among the daughters of King Lycomedes. Thetis knew her son's fate. The day he joined the war, his mortal life would end, though death would bring eternal glory. Out of fear, she hid him, disguised as a girl named Pyrrha, the flame-haired, adorned with silks and jewels, far from the iron and the cries of battle. But destiny could not be avoided, and the winds of fate could not be changed. When Odysseus learned of this, his cleverness returned. Disguised as a merchant, he came to Skyros with chests full of gifts for the women, silks, mirrors, bracelets, fine fabrics, but hidden among them were a sword, a spear, and a shield. As the women rushed to the gifts, Odysseus sounded a war trumpet. At that moment, Pyrrha alone reached for the weapons. Her hand held the steel steadily, her eyes flashed with the fire of battle. When her gaze met Odysseus's, the truth was revealed. Thetis's deception had failed, and Achilles emerged from among the women, stepping fully into his destiny to sail for Troy. Odysseus also brought together other essential pieces for victory through skillful diplomacy. He persuaded Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, to join the fight, and he brought back Philoctetes, who possessed the mighty bow of Heracles, from exile on Lemnos, where he had been abandoned with a festering wound. Odysseus's diplomacy even turned this embittered warrior into an ally, giving the Greeks an unmatched archer. Finally, after 10 years of siege, the war reached its peak with the Trojan horse, a victory born entirely of cunning. The Greeks pretended to retreat. Inside the hollow wooden horse, Odysseus and the bravest heroes hid silently, waiting for their fate. The Trojans, deceived, brought the horse into the city as a symbol of divine victory. When night fell, and the celebrations and wine dulled their senses, Odysseus and the warriors emerged. The sleeping city was set ablaze. That night marked not only the fall of Troy, but also the eternal cementing of Odysseus's reputation as the craftiest of the Greeks. Even inside the horse, when Helen tried to lure them by imitating the voices of their wives, Odysseus's self-control prevailed over strength. As Menelaus and Diomedes stirred, Odysseus pressed his hand over Anticlus's mouth to keep him from speaking, even nearly suffocating him, protecting the secret. This showed the power of his Metis. The fate of heroes depended on a single moment of silence and the will of their leader. From the ashes of Troy after that terrible victory, Odysseus's heart beat for one purpose only: to return home, to Penelope, faithful all these years, to Telemachus, now grown, to the rocky shores of Ithaca. This longing, Nostos, was more precious to him than all the treasures and fame of Troy. It was more than a desire for home. It was the essence of his humanity, the force that made him different from all other heroes. He had fought at Troy for 10 years. He would struggle for another 10 to return home. From the burning ruins, he sailed under the shadow of dark prophecies, the end of the Iliad and the beginning of the Odyssey. His journey home would be as long and hard as the war itself, filled with divine and mortal trials, storms, losses, and enchantments. Through them, he would learn the limits of his strength, the truth of mortality, and the sacred weight of family. The lesson was so strong that even when the nymph Calypso offered him eternal life, Odysseus refused. He chose instead the brief, mortal light of life, to share his limited days with those he loved. He was not just a king or a warrior, but first a husband and a father. His Metis lay not in seeking immortality, but in valuing the mortal flame. The call of home was stronger than any promise of the gods. And so, from the ashes rising among the ruins of Troy, while the black smoke of destruction still climbed toward the sky, our cunning hero set sail with the ancient longing of Nostos, the yearning for home. Odysseus, King of Ithaca, son of Laertes, hope of his people, and bearer of countless lost memories, ventured into the sea, knowing that his return was not merely a route to follow, but a rebirth weighed down by all he had lost. For a mortal, voyaging across the waters was not merely a matter of yielding to the mercy of wind and current. His fate was woven from both the consequences of his own clever decisions and the wills of the immortals who ruled from the heights of Olympus. No mortal had ever fully defied a destiny, sealed by the thunder of Zeus or the raging waves of Poseidon. The story began at the dawn of the Odyssey, far from the clamors of war upon the sacred Mount Olympus above the clouds. Zeus, god of gods, sat upon his golden throne. Beside him, the gray-eyed goddess of wisdom, Athena, concerned herself with the struggles and hopes of mortals. The gleaming halls of Olympus were quiet that day. The gods deliberated the concerns of humankind, the decisions of heroes, and the knots of fate, seeking ways to place mortals like pieces on a chessboard. The one name that dominated their discussion was the hero left to his fate amid the seas, Odysseus, King of Ithaca. Ithaca was his land, his throne, his people, and the honor of his line. There, his faithful wife Penelope and their son Telemachus waited, trusting that one day their king would return, keeping hope alive through the dim glow of the hearth at night. Athena stood before her father, speaking words both grave and thoughtful. She told him that Odysseus was not only brave, but possessed Metis, deep cunning and wisdom. She explained that he acted with measure, not arrogance, and had never lost his reverence for the gods. After hearing his daughter's insistent words, Zeus finally allowed Athena and Hermes to intervene directly. Thus, the light of Olympus began slowly to pierce the dark clouds over the sea. Yet a mountain of an obstacle remained in Poseidon, god of the seas and earthquakes, who bore a deep grudge against Odysseus, a wrath rooted not in simple anger, but in a father's pride and wounded honor. For early in his journey, in the ill-fated episode that would be recounted in detail later, Odysseus had blinded the Cyclops Polyphemus, the very son of Poseidon. That moment was not merely a struggle for survival, but a turning point of fate, carrying not only cleverness, but a heavy and painful price. Polyphemus, with his wounded eye, gazed at the sea and cried out, beseeching his father, Lord of the waters, "Father Poseidon, if you are truly my father, may Laertes' son Odysseus never reach home. And if he must, let him return alone, weary, on a stranger's ship, finding sorrow even in his own house." Poseidon heeded his son's plea. From that moment on, the sea ceased to be a mere means of travel, becoming instead an expression of divine wrath, fury, and vengeance. Waves rose, winds howled, and the surface of the waters hardened as if reflecting the god's anger. Odysseus's ship would be tossed amid this fury. Every storm struck as a sign from the god, every oar responded to a harsher rhythm, and the masts groaned under the weight of the tempest. The sea offered new trials with each passage, testing the bodies and spirits of its travelers. The invisible hands of fate tightened around them. His journey would not be merely a return across geography, but an inner trial and path of transformation. Old pride would be tempered, and the sharpness of his Metis would be refined with heavier wisdom. The other gods of Olympus would not remain indifferent to this long punishment. Athena would insist that things should not proceed so one-sidedly. Zeus would remind them of the role of mortal choice, while still seeking ways to balance the scales of justice. In the end, a decision was made, opening a window of hope for Odysseus, even as Poseidon's wrath endured. This opportunity coincided with the temporary absence of the sea god, who had journeyed to the farthest reaches of the world to offer a hecatomb to the Ethiopians. Athena skillfully seized the moment, sending Hermes, the swift messenger, to Calypso's island with Zeus's approval. Even the gods played moves like a careful game of chess. Odysseus' voyage was like a ship caught between two powerful currents. On one side, Poseidon's unending fury. On the other, Athena's silent but persistent protection. He would emerge alive from the Cyclops cave, navigate the sorceress Circe's island with cleverness, and pass skillfully through the narrow straits of Scylla and Charybdis. Each trial would wound his body at times, but sharpen his mind further. Every scar would carve a new space of understanding in his soul. Old pride would give way to strategy and patience. He would become not only a warrior, but also a leader capable of reading fate and understanding the depths of human nature. Each storm, each strait, each supernatural obstacle drew him ever closer to Ithaca. For Ithaca was not merely a geographical point, it was his kingdom, his legacy, his people's hope, and the center of his identity. Penelope's nightly weaving, the growing shadow of Telemachus, the songs of the elders on the island all echoed in Odysseus's mind, each wave reminding him of his home, his throne, and his people. The years spent at sea would teach him not only the harshness of war, but also the weight of leadership and the meaning of justice and mercy. As the cunning king pressed on through the open waters, he waged relentless struggle against the wrath of the gods, the pride of men, and the echoes of his own mistakes. The journey home was long, painful, and bloody, yet each hardship brought him closer to legend. Over time, the name of Odysseus would be remembered not only on battlefields, but in songs, chants, and the tales of elders. His Nostos would endure as a story of endurance and cunning. Episodes like the blinding of Polyphemus would be revealed in detail in the following chapters. The reasons behind them would show the inevitability of Odysseus's choices and the ways in which they sometimes tested the moral limits of humanity. Poseidon's wrath would be read not merely as divine anger, but as the echo of human deeds carried to the farthest waters. And so the ship rising over the smoldering ruins of a burned city would advance, leaving behind the cold and biting winds of Nostos. The sound of wet oars would keep a rhythm beneath a shadowed sky, while Odysseus looked to the stars each night, imagining the silhouette of Ithaca and envisioning the future of his kingdom and his people even in the midst of a gloomy sea. For Ithaca was not just an island, it was his throne, the honor of his line, and the tangible embodiment of one of humanity's deepest longings. Finally, every storm would one day cease. Every trial would one day bear fruit. Odysseus would both lose and win along the way, yet it would be known that his Nostos remained a story that would echo through the ages. This tale, begun beneath the lights of Olympus, had grown into a mighty epic shaped upon the chest of the sea, and Ithaca's waiting endured as a symbol of one of humanity's most profound desires. Odysseus, who had brought the walls of Troy to the ground with his cunning, became the target of the ocean's deepest wrath. The 20-year absence of the great Odysseus, 10 years of that devastating war, and 10 years of an unending journey home, left deep scars not only on the hero's soul, but also on his beloved homeland, the rocky island of Ithaca, shaking the moral foundation of the kingdom. At the heart of this crisis was the young Prince Telemachus, who had been a newborn when his father went to war and now, 20 years later, bore the burden of suffering, alongside Queen Penelope's struggle to preserve her honor. In the king's absence, order had dissolved, sacred laws were trampled, and the future of the kingdom lay shrouded in uncertainty. After 20 years without news of the king, a common belief spread among the noblemen of the island. Odysseus was dead. This conviction became the most striking trigger for the moral decay around the palace. Over 100 suitors, 52 from Dulichium, 24 from Same, 20 from Zacynthus, and 12 from Ithaca, had taken residence in the palace under the pretense of marrying Queen Penelope. Including their attendants, their number exceeded 180. It was as if an invading army had occupied the king's hearth, the most sacred place of the realm. Their audacity was not merely political, it was a profound act of sacrilege. These suitors trampled upon the rules of hospitality, Xenia, protected even by Zeus himself. Every day the cattle raised in Odysseus's fertile lands, the fattest sheep and richest goats, were sacrificed for feasts. The kingdom's aged wines were poured as freely as water, and bread from the ovens was wasted recklessly. The palace had ceased to be a serene royal home, instead becoming a space of ceaseless, licentious revelry from dawn until late night. The smell of roasted meat, spilled wine, and brazen laughter permeated the majestic halls. The suitors did not just consume Odysseus's wealth. With every bite and every cup of wine, they tarnished Penelope's honor and shredded the moral fabric of the kingdom. This hopeless state weighed heavily on young Telemachus's spirit. Amid all this, Queen Penelope displayed unwavering loyalty and noble resistance in her role of protecting her husband's home and legacy. She resisted the immense social pressure surrounding her and the tiresome proposals that came daily. In her heart, she maintained a faint but steadfast hope that her husband would return one day, perhaps miraculously, but inevitably. Penelope's resistance was not passive. Like her husband, she wielded her cunning, Metis, as a shield. She devised her most famous and delicate stratagem to stall the suitors, weaving a great shroud for her elderly father-in-law Laertes. She announced that she would not choose a new husband until the shroud was completed. Outwardly, it seemed a pious task, but beneath it lay great cunning. By day, she wove the delicate shroud with utmost seriousness and patience under the watch of her faithful servants. By night, however, when the palace lamps were extinguished and the world lay in deep sleep, Penelope secretly unraveled all she had completed. This act was not merely a trick, it was a way of pausing time, slowing the flow of fate for nearly 3 years. Through the threads she wove and then unraveled, she bought precious time for her husband's return. This silent cunning, lasting nearly 3 years, proved Penelope's intelligence. Yet as with every secret, there comes an end. One of the unfaithful servants, a symptom of the palace's moral decay, betrayed the queen. The suitors caught her in the act, and her weaving ruse was exposed. Penelope could no longer continue her trick, and the suitors' pressure reached unbearable heights. Both her honor and Odysseus's throne now teetered on the edge of ruin. This humiliating situation placed an unbearable weight on the young Prince Telemachus, now 20, who had been a newborn when his father left for war. In the shadow of his father's 20-year absence, he had to grow into a man, learn to speak with authority in the council, and stand against the suitors' immorality. Yet he was still too young and weak to confront their numbers, their audacity, and the kingdom's lost authority. He sat silently in the palace, often with tears in his eyes, dreaming of his father's grand return and the moment of vengeance. He was the living symbol of the kingdom's suffering. It was at the height of this despair that the shadows of Olympus fell over Ithaca. Having decided on Odysseus's return, the goddess Athena took action to bring a spark of hope to his son. Disguised first as Metis, the chief of the Taphians, and later as Mentor, his father's aged and wise friend, she entered the palace. Athena's goal was not merely to deliver a message. She came to awaken the sleeping hero within Telemachus and urge him into immediate action. With her wise, comforting, and divine voice, she spoke encouraging words about his father's fate. Most importantly, she directed him to seek the wisdom of his ancestors, to travel perilously to Nestor in Pylos and the great Menelaus in Sparta, to gather concrete information about his father's whereabouts. Athena's divine prompting ignited a fire in the young prince's soul. No longer silent in shame and despair, Telemachus was filled with newfound courage. For the first time, he openly challenged the suitors in the council. His voice, a distant echo of his father's authority, rang strong. The suitors, especially the boldest Antinous, were enraged. They claimed the young prince's words were merely inspired by his mother's known cunning, an act of feminine trickery attempting to belittle his authority. Guided by Athena, Telemachus knew the time for action had come. He secretly arranged a ship, unseen by the suitors, and with Athena disguised as Mentor, embarked on his individual journey in search of Nostos, homecoming, to Pylos. This journey, known as Telemachy in the epic, was not only a search but a rite of passage marking the young prince's maturation and self-discovery. When the suitors learned of Telemachus' departure, they were filled with rage and astonishment. Noman, the man who had lent the ship, revealed the plan. Antinous, in particular, could not forgive the young prince's audacity, not only challenging the suitors at home, but also daring to set sail secretly. He immediately plotted to ambush and kill Telemachus upon his return. Danger now shadowed the young prince like a persistent threat over the seas. Unaware of these dangers, Telemachus pressed on. In Pylos, he was warmly welcomed by Nestor, the wise elderly survivor of the Trojan War. Nestor shared detailed accounts of the complex and arduous returns of the war's heroes. Most importantly, he offered an example: the story of Orestes, who avenged his father Agamemnon against Aegisthus. This tale served as a moral mirror, reminding Telemachus of the sacred duty awaiting him. Nestor emphasized Athena's support, granting divine assurance. Nestor's son Pisistratus joined Telemachus as a companion on this spiritual journey. Their next stop was Sparta, where King Menelaus and Queen Helen, the cause of the Trojan War, welcomed them with utmost grandeur and hospitality. Menelaus recounted the 8 years of his own perilous return from Troy to Egypt, including his encounter with the old sea god Proteus. Here, Telemachus finally learned what he sought. Proteus had told Menelaus that Odysseus was still alive, held captive by the nymph Calypso on a distant, hidden island. This journey transformed Telemachus from a child into a prince. No longer living on uncertain hope, he now held concrete knowledge of his father's fate. He was no longer in search. He had a mission and a destiny. This experience gave him the courage to return home and face the suitors, armed with the promise of his father's vengeance. Thus, the Telemachi concluded, planting the first seeds of the plan for the return of our cunning hero. On the other side, the wheel of fate was turning for our cunning hero, and he found himself in the merciless embrace of the ocean. The exhaustion from the ominous journey home that began after the fall of Troy had swept him away from the lands of mortals to a place so remote that even the gods could scarcely find it. A place where time seemed to stand still. After his ship was shattered by the divine storm that followed the slaughter of the sun, god Helios's sacred cattle, he clung to life on a lone piece of wreckage, suspended on the thin line between life and death. Helpless, he drifted until he found himself on the enchanted island of Ogygia, evergreen, shrouded in mist, hidden away by immortals. This island was the home of Calypso, a beautiful, cunning, and powerful nymph descended from the mighty Titan Atlas, ruler of the ocean depths. In this paradise-like prison, Odysseus was held against his will for 7 long years. Calypso, a goddess whose moss-covered cave was adorned with purple and yellow flowers and whose delicate voice echoed like rippling water, sought to make him fall in love with her. Every corner of the island exuded the heavy, sweet scent of endless pleasure and peace. Born of the foaming seas, Calypso's beauty was unparalleled, and Ogygia represented a safe and distant haven beyond the reach of that ceaseless war, unending suffering and Poseidon's relentless wrath. Here, in a place where even his monumental cunning, the trick of nobody, held no meaning, Odysseus faced the offer of immortality and the eternal delights of the island. Had he accepted, he would have forsaken the dust of Troy, the longing for Ithaca, and all the sorrows of mortality forever, living as a demigod amid endless spring. Yet for our cunning hero, these divine pleasures were worth less than the mortal desire he carried in his heart. Odysseus chose Nostos, the yearning for home, over godhood, over eternal bliss. For 7 years, he resisted every comfort and sweet word Calypso offered, standing firm as an iceberg against temptation. At night, bound by necessity to share her bed, his mind and soul wandered over the rocky shores beyond the 7 seas. By day, he withdrew from the cave's warmth and the nymph's melodic voice. He made a ritual of sitting on the remotest, most desolate part of the island, gazing at the foamy waters lapping the shore and weeping. His tears mingled with the endless ocean, their salty scent a testament to his unending sorrow. He longed to see the smoke rising from his home, fixating his mournful gaze on the distant horizon. This choice was not merely personal. It proved to the universe that the honor of mortality and the power of family ties were worth more than all divine pleasures and immortality. This unwavering longing was the cornerstone of Odysseus's character. Beyond king and warrior, he was a faithful husband and father. At the peak of this superhuman endurance, the threads of fate began to be drawn once more on Olympus. As previously recounted, Odysseus's plight had again been brought before the assembly of gods in Poseidon's absence. Athena's sharp and steadfast defense resonated in Zeus's conscience. The king of gods knew well that no matter how much Poseidon complained, Odysseus's destiny would not end in this sweet captivity. His trials could only conclude upon reaching home. At last, with Zeus's resounding, indisputable command, the messenger Hermes intervened. Wearing his golden sandals that allowed him to fly over land and sea like the wind, he set off toward Ogygia. Hermes' journey transcended time and space. He was an eternal bridge connecting heaven and earth, gods and mortals. Upon reaching the island, the contrast between the natural beauty of the paradise-like cave and the supernatural splendor of its goddess resident dazzled even him. Hermes entered the cave and delivered Zeus's absolute, unarguable decree to Calypso. She could no longer detain Odysseus and must allow him to go. The goddess, deeply grieved, felt the shadow of anger and disappointment cross her immortal features. She deemed it unfair that male gods could pursue mortals at will, yet female deities could not keep them by their side. Still, she knew well the hierarchy of Olympus and the power of Zeus's aegis. Painfully, she realized she could not defy his will. In the dim light of the cave, Calypso found Odysseus as usual, gazing at the sea. She approached and, with her melodic but now tinged with desperation voice, told him he was free. By the goddess's command, she was forced to provide the materials and tools to release him. It was in this moment that Odysseus's indomitable cunning, Metis, shone anew. Not merely a warrior, he was also a master craftsman. Using the raw, wild timber provided by Calypso, he built a ship strong enough to withstand the sea's full fury. Every plank he shaped, every nail he drove, he rebuilt his own destiny, each stroke breaking the chains of 7 years' captivity. Seeing his unwavering determination, Calypso could not resist one final psychological plea. With a sorrowful tone and the awareness of her eternal beauty, she confronted the inevitability of mortality. "Poor man," she said, "your wife Penelope is not as beautiful as I, nor will she live as long or be immortal. Stay with me and all this can be yours." Odysseus met her gaze with wise, weary eyes. His reply was the most poignant confession of mortal honor and fidelity. He acknowledged her beauty, but declared, "My queen, my wife may not match your eternal form. She is mortal, and you are immortal. Yet I wish to return home. I know the perils that await me, Poseidon's wrath upon the seas. Still, I would rather endure all these sufferings and see the smoke of my homeland than enjoy immortal pleasures." Thus, the supremacy of Nostos over all that Calypso offered was affirmed. The goddess's final hope faltered. At dawn, Odysseus departed, leaving the paradise of Ogygia behind, stepping into the cold, unknown waters of the sea. Behind him, a beloved goddess grieved. Ahead, the relentless fury of Poseidon and endless trials awaited. From the serene, sweet captivity of Ogygia, he sailed toward the perilous freedom of the open seas. His suffering had only just begun. He who had turned away from the promise of eternal immortality with the sorrowful spirit of Nostos stepped upon the delicate raft he had built with his own hands. For our cunning hero, leaving Ogygia was a moment of liberation, but this liberation marked the beginning of a far greater and harsher ordeal. After 7 years of sweet captivity, Odysseus set sail into the open waters, into the wrath of Poseidon. For 18 days our hero read the winds and currents like a master, pressing onward toward his homeland. The journey where the azure sky met the endless sea began calm and hopeful. But Poseidon, incensed after receiving the grand hecatomb from the Ethiopians, rose like a slumbering giant preparing to return to Olympus. And across that endless blue he spotted the lone, mortal figure upon the raft. Poseidon's eyes, filled with the pain of his son, the blinded Cyclops Polyphemus, raged with vengeance, swelling the depths of the sea. Brandishing his trident, he stirred a colossal storm. The sky was instantly shrouded in pitch-black clouds. The winds assaulted the raft's sails like a roaring beast. The waves struck it with the force of Zeus's own lightning. Poseidon's fury was no mere storm. It was a divine curse cast upon the hero. Odysseus's fragile craft was tossed like a toy against this cosmic wrath. The timbered raft, powerless before the god's might, splintered. Its fragments disappeared among the foaming waves, like the remnants of the hero's hope. Falling into the abyss of despair, Odysseus pondered the cruel truth. The Danaans who died before Troy had been luckier. Their heroism had sealed an honorable end. He, however, now faced the most pitiful and lonely fate in the heart of the sea, awaiting death by drowning. In that moment of utter despair, a divine spark of mercy arose from the ocean's depths. The sea goddess Ino, taking the form of the most graceful of seabirds, a swan, glided toward Odysseus despite the storm's fury. Radiant and ethereal, she reached him, her melodic yet urgent voice piercing the roar of the waves. Ino bestowed upon him an immortal veil, a treasure of incomparable value. She instructed him to abandon the shattered raft entirely and, wrapping himself in the veil, swim toward the shore. With this divine protection, she guaranteed his survival. Even under Poseidon's wrath, Odysseus placed his cunning trust in Ino and departed from the broken vessel. Under the veil's protection, he battled the merciless waves for 2 days and 2 nights. By the third dawn, his body was spent, his muscles burning, his spirit nourished only by the final hope of Nostos. The waves tossed him like a rag. The sea seemed poised to swallow him at every turn. He was caught in the battle of the storm, the waters, and Poseidon's wrath against mortality. Yet at last, on that third dawn, weary and salt-stung, and with the divine aid of Athena, the storm's roar subsided, and Poseidon's fury eased temporarily. The ocean calmed like a tired beast. As the first light of the sun glimmered on the ocean's horizon, Odysseus beheld the promise of salvation, the shores of Scheria. This was the land of the Phaeacians, where peace and mastery of seafaring reigned supreme. Once raided by the Cyclopes, the wise King Nausithous had settled them in this secluded realm. Scheria, in its literal sense, was a land reaching out into the sea. It was a haven for sailors, the final hope of land. After Nausithous' death, the kingdom was ruled by the just King Alcinous, guided by the counsel of the gods. Yet even reaching the shore was a trial. Sharp rocks jutted into the sea like teeth, and the coastline threatened to tear a weary swimmer apart. With one final exertion, Odysseus made his way through the rocks to the mouth of a river. Exhausted and nearly unrecognizable even to the gods, he emerged on the shore, carrying the full weight of mortality's pain, hidden among the dense branches of olive trees. Sleep, after 7 years of captivity, 18 days at sea and 2 days of fierce struggle, touched him like a merciful kiss. At that moment, fate, guided by Athena's gentle hands, wove events in the land of the Phaeacians. Athena entered the dreams of young, graceful Princess Nausicaa, daughter of King Alcinous. The goddess instructed her that, having reached marriageable age, she must go to the river with her maidens the next morning to wash clothes. As dawn, with rose-fingered fingers, spread its first light over Sharia, Nausicaa and her maidens reached the river. While playing with a ball on the shore after washing their clothes, the ball rolled near the olive trees where Odysseus slept. The young women's cries awoke the weary hero. Emerging naked and covered in sand like a wild man, the maidens screamed in terror. Yet Nausicaa, with divine courage instilled by Athena, remained standing. At a moment when brute force would fail, Odysseus employed his hard-earned cunning from the battlefields of Troy, this time in diplomacy. Not as a beggar, but as a noble and wise king, he approached Nausicaa with grace. He inquired whether she was a goddess or mortal, praised her beauty, and humbly requested one thing: guidance to the city and garments to cover his nakedness. His words touched the young princess's heart. Impressed by the wisdom and noble sadness of this stranger, Nausicaa immediately provided him clean clothes and instructed him to walk alone into the city to avoid gossip. The Phaeacians were a seafaring people, not overly hospitable to strangers. She told him to wait in a sacred grove devoted to Athena before reaching her father's palace, a precaution to avoid jeopardizing the decision of the Phaeacian nobles. On the path to the city, Odysseus once again witnessed Athena's protection. The goddess shrouded him in a thick, mysterious mist, rendering him invisible to all. Under this divine veil, he reached King Alcinous's palace. When the mist lifted outside the palace, Athena, disguised as a small girl, whispered his final instruction: to approach the wise and powerful Queen Arete, the true authority of the palace, and entreat her mercy. If he won her favor, the hearts of the Phaeacians would open to him. Odysseus entered the grand hall, resplendent with wealth at the pinnacle of human craftsmanship. Bronze walls gleamed, cornices were inlaid with blue enamel, and legendary mastiffs of gold and silver, wrought by the immortal smith Hephaestus, stood guard. This splendor sharply contrasted with the humble ruggedness of his home in Ithaca. He advanced silently across the hall, the sole figure upright amidst the crowd, and following Athena's counsel, knelt at Queen Arete's feet in a pleading gesture, entreating the Phaeacians to help him reach home. Then, as a symbol of shame and exhaustion, he sat among the ashes of the extinguished banquet fire. A hush fell over the hall, silencing the revelry. King Alcinous, momentarily bewildered, hesitated. Yet the elder noble Iconius reminded him, "O king, do not forget the laws of hospitality. Grant this man the respect he deserves." The king heeded his counsel, raised Odysseus from the ashes, offered him a seat, and provided a feast to restore his weary body. During the meal, Queen Arete noticed that the garments Odysseus wore had been made in her household, and, astonished, asked about them. It was then that Odysseus recounted his escape from 7 years of Calypso's captivity and his encounter with Nausicaa. His narrative, wise, cunning, and sincere, won the hearts of all present. King Alcinous, deeply moved, offered Odysseus the highest honor, even marriage to one of his daughters. But Odysseus' reply was resolute. His one desire surpassed all offers: to return home. The king respected this unwavering longing and promised the next day a swift ship and safe escort for his journey. Thus, the cunning hero, having survived the wrath of gods, the wreckage of storms and the chains of captivity, finally found a haven. Yet his story was far from over. Fate had pulled our cunning hero from the wrathful, stormy waters of Poseidon and brought him to the most elegant and peaceful harbor of the civilized world, the magnificent land of the Phaeacians, Aiaia. King Alcinous, following the sacred command of hospitality laws, organized a grand feast and celebration the next day to honor Odysseus. The city's nobles, the proud and isolated seafaring people who sailed the fastest ships on the sea, had gathered in the palace. Even in this mortal ceremony, the hand of the goddess Athena rested upon her hero. Before the feast, with an unseen touch, she made Odysseus's weary body appear taller, more majestic and imposing. This divine transformation reflected not the image of a tired and stripped man, but that of a noble king, instantly leaving a respected impression on the Phaeacians, for they valued not only nobility, but strength as well. King Alcinous knew that his guest was not an ordinary beggar, but a great king, and he set about preparing the fastest escort ships to return him to his Nostos. One of the most sacred moments of the feast was the appearance of the blind bard Demodocus. Blessed by the gods with the gift of divine song, but deprived of sight, the bard transformed the legendary tales deep within his soul into the voice of his lyre. In the midst of the feast, he took up his lyre and sang his first melodic song. It recounted the bloody and glorious scenes of the Trojan War, the acts of heroism, and, most importantly, Odysseus's critical role in these epic events. The hall was enveloped in a magical atmosphere by the bard's voice. Yet, as Odysseus listened to the noble tales, he was overcome with unbearable pain. The story of his honor and victories was intertwined with the lament for the companions he had lost, and the 20 years of suffering he had endured. Tears ran down his weary eyes, carrying the deepest sorrow of a king, a father, and a mortal man. To conceal his identity and anguish, he pulled his cloak and mantle over his head and, bowing his head to the table, wept in quiet sobs. King Alcinous, seated nearby, noticed the silent sobs. Such behavior was unusual for a guest, and it piqued the king's curiosity. To divert his guest's attention and grant the mysterious visitor some tranquility, Alcinous paused the feast and ordered the beginning of athletic contests. The Phaeacians wished to demonstrate not only their shipbuilding prowess, but also their superiority in boxing, wrestling, running, and archery over other nations, a matter of pride for them. As the Phaeacian youths showcased their athletic skills, Odysseus initially refused to participate. His body was weary, his spirit sorrowful, and his only desire was to return home. This reluctance prompted one of the Phaeacian youths, Euryalus, to approach him arrogantly and insult him. Euryalus accused Odysseus of being a greedy merchant, devoid of athletic skill, chasing only profit. For a Mycenaean hero, this was the greatest insult to his honor. Odysseus' warrior spirit and Metis awoke instantly. Fatigue and sorrow vanished, leaving only rage and the desire to prove himself. He rose immediately, bending to grasp the oldest and heaviest discus. With the strength of 20 years of suffering and divine fury, he hurled it. The discus whistled through the air, flying far beyond all Phaeacian throws. Everyone was stunned into silence. The discus landed far beyond the best attempts of the Phaeacians, reaching a new boundary set by fate. Athena, now in the guise of a young man, mingled among the spectators and confirmed with a voice full of wisdom and authority that it was indeed the finest throw, unreachable by any mortal. Odysseus had proven his superiority, demonstrating that he possessed not only cunning but extraordinary physical power as well. After the athletic contest, the feast resumed. At the persistent request of the Phaeacians, Demodocus sang again, this time about the fall of Troy and the story of the Trojan horse. The bard recounted with melodic sorrow how the heroes hid inside the massive wooden horse and how the city was cunningly sacked that night. As Odysseus listened, his grief intensified. He heard the triumph of his own Metis, yet beneath this victory lay the weight of loss and sorrow. It was a lament for the fallen, the captured, and all that had been lost. King Alcinous noticed Odysseus's tears once more and could no longer bear it. He halted the bard and with great sincerity asked the guest the crucial question: who he was, where he had wandered, and why the stories of the Trojan War affected him so deeply. A profound silence fell over the palace. Odysseus removed his cloak, his eyes carrying the fatigue of the sea and the war, and slowly, in a majestic tone, spoke, "I am Odysseus, son of Laertes, renowned among men for my cunning. My fame reaches the heavens." This confession was not merely a declaration of identity. It was the emergence of the living hero of all the epics told until that moment. Odysseus was no longer merely a guest, but a living legend. From his own lips, he began recounting the trials of his 10-year ordeal. He knew that his narrative would revive his own sufferings and provide the listeners with a grand, beautiful tale. He was a king, a warrior, and now the storyteller of his own journey. With the power of words, he would gift the Phaeacians the saga of 10 years spent losing comrades, defying gods, and rejecting immortality. Thus the epic began in the voice of its hero. In the midst of the feast, the grand hall of the Phaeacians had fallen into an unshakable silence, a silence formed by the words of a single man amidst the clamor of magnificent hospitality and celebration. They knew that before them sat a king who wrote his own destiny with his own hands, the very embodiment of legend, great Odysseus. And when the cunning hero finished speaking, what he had recounted was more than just a story. It was the summary of 20 years of suffering and the endless longing inherent to mortality. Then he parted his lips and the adventure began, starting from the very first stop after the fall of Troy. The first moments of Odysseus's epic journey, as he recounted to the Phaeacians, were a harsh lesson in the recklessness and weakness of will that followed a great victory. The burden of the 10 long years of relentless fighting behind the walls of Troy had barely lifted from the shoulders of his crew, only to be replaced by unbridled pride and overconfidence. It was as if the fall of Troy had granted them immortality and invulnerability. Their first stop after Troy was the wealthy city of Ismarus, in the lands of the Thracian tribe, the Cicones. The Cicones had been allies of the Trojans in the war. Therefore, by the ancient laws of warfare, the city was a legitimate target for plunder. Odysseus and his fleet of 12 ships landed on the shores of Ismarus. The hero's intention was only to gather supplies and allow his weary crew a moment of rest. The city was plundered with little resistance. The treasures of the Cicones, their fine-aged wines, well-fed cattle, and gold-embroidered goods, were quickly loaded onto the ships. Yet the intoxicating confidence of their great victory at Troy clouded the minds of his men. Enchanted by the rich food and deep red wine, they indulged in the spoils and lost sight of discipline. Odysseus, as captain of the ships, leader of the men and king responsible for their fate, immediately urged them to depart. He had sensed with his cunning mind the danger that awaited in the inland regions of Thrace, yet his men would not listen. They were absorbed in their feasting and drinking, forgetting their fatigue and longing for home, Nostos, in the shadow of momentary pleasure. This negligence and lack of discipline would prove costly. The larger, stronger, and battle-ready Cicones tribes from the interior gathered swiftly on horseback. At the dim, misty first light of dawn, they launched a fierce and merciless counterattack on Odysseus's unprepared and intoxicated men at the shores of Ismarus. The clash was bloody and savage. Unlike the grand, orderly battles at Troy, this was an ambush, a wild execution. The Cicones, numerically superior and driven by rage, struck with lethal precision. Odysseus and his men suffered heavy losses. From each ship, 6 brave and loyal comrades were killed. It was not merely a defeat, but a tragedy that could have been avoided countless times. Only with great effort and the furiously rowing of oars did they manage to retreat to the sea. The fleet's withdrawal from the shore was a humiliating escape for the proud Achaean heroes. This was the first and harshest lesson in the dangers of recklessness for Odysseus on his long and arduous journey. As a king, he realized that the disregard of his command, the pride and the greed of his companions exacted the highest price, the lives of his loyal comrades. After leaving the Cicones, the dark wrath of the seas engulfed them. The last remnants of hope from Troy were replaced by fierce winds and unknown waters. 10 days of relentless storms battered their ships, carrying them far off course, southward, to a mysterious shore ruled by lethargy and forgetfulness. After 10 days of unending storm, they finally reached the island of the Lotus Eaters. This place was entirely different from the bloody savagery of the Cicones or Poseidon's wrathful seas. The island exuded eternal spring, calm, and a hypnotic serenity. The Lotus Eaters, the island's inhabitants, were harmless and exceedingly hospitable. They honored the ancient law of hospitality by offering food and drink, but the gift was no ordinary fruit. It was the magical lotus fruit, containing a powerful narcotic. Those who consumed it forgot all their past sorrows, the fatigue of 10 years of war, the ceaseless torment of the seas, and above all, their homes and families. After tasting the fruit, the mortal grief vanished, and minds sank into a sweet, languid slumber. Those who ate it wished only to remain in the peaceful shade of the island, no longer recalling Troy, Ithaca, Penelope, or the burning longing of Nostos. All that existed was the infinite stupor of the fruit. Some of Odysseus's companions tasted the fruit and immediately fell under its dangerous, blissful lethargy. They forgot the most basic human desire, to return home. They no longer wished to row, sail, or fight. This was not an attack by a physical monster, but a psychological threat, seizing the very will of a human being. Odysseus quickly perceived the perilous nature of the fruit and its power to enslave the mind. With his Metis, he knew that while escaping physical death was possible, evading the death of will was far more difficult. He immediately forbade his companions from consuming more. He forcibly dragged the sleeping, smiling, and utterly defenseless men back to the ships from the paradisiacal shores. To ensure they would not attempt to return, He bound them with chains to the deck, swiftly moving them away from the dangerous lethargy. This episode taught the hero that beyond the oceans and battles, the human spirit itself harbored the greatest danger. He saw once more how fragile the will of his companions could be. The island of the Lotus Eaters had shown him that purposelessness, forgetfulness, and fleeing from grief could completely erase the identity of a king and a hero. The cunning hero did not fear death, but he feared being forgotten and facing his own grief. He who had forcibly dragged his companions' wills away from the sweet poison of the lotus, who had paid the heaviest price for indiscipline on the bloodied shores of the Cicones, now reached with the remaining crew a new and almost supernatural land, the island of the colossal Cyclopes. After the lethargic, sweet tranquility of the Lotus Eaters, this island was ruled by crude, primitive, and threatening nature, rocky and jagged. These giants, cannibalistic and one-eyed, were terrifying creatures descended from the god Poseidon, masters of all the seas. They knew neither civilization nor respect for Zeus's laws, nor did they attempt communal life. Each lived in isolation under their own rules, beneath their own rock in a savage solitude. With his cunning, curious mind, Odysseus went ashore with 12 chosen men to explore a distant shepherd's camp, leaving the bulk of the fleet behind. This was not only driven by curiosity, but also by the ancient Achaean law of hospitality, xenia. A stranger entering a house had the right to demand respect, food, and the reward of hospitality. Odysseus did not go unprepared. He carried with him a goatskin filled with sharp, strong, dark wine, saved from the sack of Ismarus. It was not just a drink, but a secret weapon crafted as part of his Metis to face a future danger invisibly. Soon they reached a large and terrifying cave near the shore. Finding no one inside, his men whispered in fear. The place exuded the primal scent of danger and savagery. Yet Odysseus insisted on waiting inside to see a host and claim the rewards of hospitality. His insistence was not mere curiosity, but a reflection of the dangerous pride and insatiable boldness still lingering in him after Troy's great victory. As the sun neared the horizon, the cave entrance darkened with a burning dread. The colossal creature, Cyclops Polyphemus, returned, bearing a massive load of cut wood on his shoulders. His single eye glowed fiercely in the cavern's darkness. With his enormous hands, he blocked the cave entrance with a boulder that 22 oxen could not have moved. Odysseus and his men were trapped. Calling on the laws of hospitality one last time, Odysseus addressed the Cyclops, reminding him that Zeus protected all strangers and that he should honor this sacred law. Polyphemus disregarded mortal law entirely, his rasping voice mocking and threatening. "The Cyclopes care for neither Zeus nor the other gods," he said. "We are stronger than all of them." His words were not just a threat, but a declaration of godless savagery. Without delay, the Cyclops seized 2 unlucky men, consuming them whole, bones, marrow, and all. Blood dripped onto the damp cave floor. Humanity and civilization had been defeated by primal savagery. That night, within the cave, the hero's spirits teetered on the edge of a deep despair. Thereafter, each morning and evening, Polyphemus systematically consumed 2 more men, perpetuating his horrific terror. During this harrowing wait, Odysseus's cunning mind worked at deadly speed. He realized that killing the Cyclops with a sword, though tempting, would be suicide. They could not move the massive boulder at the cave entrance. To kill their foe would be to entomb themselves alive. Survival required not brute strength, but Metis, cunning. Inside the cave, Odysseus noticed a massive, freshly cut olive wood staff left for herding Polyphemus's flock. He and his remaining men carefully sharpened its tip while the Cyclops was away, then hardened it in the fire. This was not merely preparation, but a testament to Odysseus' craftsmanship. He transformed a simple branch into a deadly weapon. As evening fell, Polyphemus returned, gorged and satiated from devouring 2 more men. Odysseus began the second phase of his plan, offering the mighty, sweet wine he had brought. The taste was unfamiliar and exquisite to the savage Cyclops. Polyphemus drank greedily, succumbing to intoxication. In his drunken stupor, Polyphemus asked Odysseus his name. Here lay the most ingenious twist of Odysseus's plan. He replied with a sly smile, saying his name was Nobody. Laughing drunkenly, the Cyclops declared that Nobody would be his last victim. Soon, swayed by wine and fatigue, the giant fell to the ground, the cave shaking with his collapse. Then came the moment of action. Odysseus and 4 chosen men seized the sharpened, fire-hardened stake with both hands. They drove it with all their strength into the Cyclops' single eye, twisting it like a drill. The sound of the olive wood penetrating his eye was like a blacksmith plunging metal into water. Polyphemus's howl was a terrifying supernatural wail that shook the island's cliffs. Other Cyclopes outside rushed toward the noise. From behind the boulder blocking the entrance, voices called, asking who had harmed him. Polyphemus, writhing in agony, cried out in his single eye, "Nobody is hurting me. Nobody is killing me." Hearing this, the other Cyclopes assumed this was sickness or madness, not attack, and departed. This was cunning's triumph over brute force. Blinded and enraged, Polyphemus groped the cave entrance. Odysseus devised one final escape. The next morning, as the herd left, he had his men tie 3 of the thickest, woolliest sheep together, hiding themselves beneath the middle ones while he clung atop the largest ram. Polyphemus, feeling the backs of the sheep, failed to detect the trick. The ram carried Odysseus past the massive boulder, and they emerged free. Back on the ship, in the safe waters, Odysseus's rebellious spirit surged. He had avenged himself, survived and overcome a giant, yet the pride, hubris of the triumph momentarily clouded his judgment. As the ship sailed away from the Cyclops island, he made a fateful, irreversible mistake. He revealed his true identity, shouting with full audacity, "If anyone asks who blinded you, say, 'It is Odysseus, son of Laertes, destroyer of cities from Ithaca.'" This declaration revived in Polyphemus's mind the prophecy he had once heard from the seer Telemus. His wrath now fed not only on pain, but on the fulfillment of fate itself. Polyphemus hurled a massive rock toward the ship. Though it missed, the wave it created pushed them perilously close to shore. In desperation and rage, Polyphemus lifted his arms to the sky and prayed to his father Poseidon, demanding a curse that Odysseus would never reach home. And if he did, only after losing all his comrades and facing new trials on a foreign ship and in his household. Poseidon, lord of the oceans, accepted the plea. Odysseus had survived by his cunning, but his pride had condemned him to endless suffering, his hubris sealing the fate of the cunning hero. Heir to the colossal wrath of Cyclops Polyphemus and the irreversible curse of Poseidon, the cunning hero and his diminished crew were now swept along by the capricious winds of fate. Every stroke of the oar seemed to increase the weight of the sea god's fury upon them. Yet as every storm has its end, so too did their despair hold a glimmer of chance. After a grueling journey, they reached the island ruled by Aiaia, keeper of the winds. Aiaia, appointed by Zeus as the divine guardian of the winds, wielded authority that bordered on the sacred. The island, often described by sailors as the floating isle, earned its name not merely from geography, but from the mercurial nature of the winds themselves, relentless and unpredictable, shaping the lives and trials of those who dared navigate them. Here, sky met sea, mortal met divine, and the power of the atmosphere assumed tangible form. For a full month, Aiaia hosted Odysseus and his weary men in his magnificent hall, exercising the highest degree of xenia, the sacred law of hospitality. Odysseus spent this time recounting the hardships of his voyage, the losses of his companions, and the horrors endured in Polyphemus's cave. When the time for departure arrived, Aiaia bestowed upon Odysseus a gift of unmatched value, scarcely rivaled even among the gods. Within a massive leather bag, all the contrary winds and storms of the earth were bound tightly with silver cords, leaving only the gentle west wind free to blow continuously toward Ithaca. This gift was a golden bridge to Nostos, the longed-for homecoming. Yet Aiaia warned Odysseus with sharp and stern words. Under no circumstance should the bag be opened before reaching Ithaca. It was a divine trust, requiring absolute discipline. For 9 days, Odysseus and his men sailed propelled by Aiais's gentle, favorable wind. On the 9th day, Ithaca's jagged shores and the smoke rising from its mountaintops finally came into view. Odysseus could smell his homeland, feeling the ocean's weariness slip from him. Having not left the helm for 9 days, he had kept his gaze fixed on the critical moment of homecoming. Yet, in the final instant, exhaustion and 9 days without sleep claimed him, surrendering him to an inevitable slumber. Sleep, cruelly, betrayed him at the moment of utmost importance. While Odysseus slept, his greedy and jealous crew moved. Known for their laziness and indiscipline, they mistook Aiais's bag for a treasure chest, imagining it filled with gold and silver. Despite all they had endured, they resented that their captain had kept this precious secret gift from them. In their minds, jealousy and betrayal outweighed even the sweet longing of Nostos. Believing it to be treasure, they opened the tightly bound bag. Instantly, every wind was unleashed and a roaring storm erupted on deck. The heavens thundered, the seas raged. The delicate west wind was lost, replaced by east, north, and south winds that tore the ship apart. The vessel was hurled far from Ithaca, back toward Aiais's floating isle. 10 days of effort had been undone by a moment of greed. Awakening to this calamity, Odysseus could scarcely comprehend what had happened. Ithaca, once so near, had again become an unreachable phantom. Desperate, he struggled to return to Aiais's island. Unaware that the gods themselves had cursed him, he begged Aiaia once more for aid, explaining the folly and greed of his men. But Aiais's demeanor was now firm and unyielding. He discerned that Odysseus's return to Ithaca in such a manner was a sure sign of divine wrath. As a god who respected Zeus' authority, Aiaia could not risk aiding one condemned by the gods, lest he draw their own fury upon himself. The keeper of the winds expelled Odysseus harshly. "Begone, accursed mortal! Your curse is now manifest." Humiliated, Odysseus, a proud king, was forced to set sail again, his spirit crushed by the betrayal of his crew and the refusal of divine assistance. He was no longer a hero, he was a hunted, cursed man. This disaster marked the first staggering consequence of Poseidon's wrath, and simultaneously, the first clear, chilling signal that his crew's folly, disobedience, and greed might doom them to oblivion rather than return. Their destruction would not come at the hands of Poseidon alone, but by the weakness within themselves. Odysseus, betrayed by his crew and cast back from the very threshold of Ithaca, once again felt the crushing weight of Poseidon's curse, compounded by Aiais's refusal. The cunning hero and his remaining men rowed through the merciless waters of the open sea, their spirits shattered, every stroke a testament to exhaustion and despair. For 6 days and nights after leaving Aiais's floating island, they found neither a resting port nor a sign of hope. All they could do was push their arms to the limit, rowing blindly into the unknown. At dawn on the 7th day, the horizon revealed a strange and threatening landscape. The coast of Telepilos, the city of the Laestrygonians, the far gate. The land of cannibal giants. This land offered a tangible terror, far surpassing the psychological threats of prior stops. Here dwelled giants who devoured men. The harbor, a natural formation seemingly carved by a god's hand, rose steep and jagged from the sea like a colossal bowl. Its entrance was narrow, foreboding, yet the waters within appeared calm and glass-like, untouched by wind or wave. A deceptive sanctuary, it concealed a deadly trap. Most captains of the remaining 11 ships, still clinging to the remnants of the Trojan fleet, were deceived by this serene harbor and quickly anchored their vessels. But Odysseus, ever cautious and shrewd, sensed peril in the unnatural calm. He anchored his own ship outside the harbor, on a rocky point overlooking the open sea, a prescient decision that would save him and his remaining crew from the most lethal blow of fate. Odysseus sent a reconnaissance party to explore the shore. Along a riverside path, they encountered a towering, intimidating, yet oddly delicate girl, daughter of the Laestrygonian king, Antiphates. She displayed no hostility, instead guiding them toward her father's dwelling. Inside, however, horror awaited. A monstrous queen greeted them, her voice a terrifying roar that shattered their courage, summoning her husband. King Antiphates emerged, a colossal figure more beast than man. Without a word, he seized one of Odysseus's men and devoured him alive, bones and all, as if he were a mere insect. The fleet's annihilation. The remaining 2 men fled in terror, setting off an alarm throughout the city. Antiphates and the other cannibal giants swarmed from cliffs and hills toward the harbor. From their elevated vantage, they hurled massive boulders at the anchored ships. The calm, enclosed harbor became a slaughterhouse. The rocks smashed upon the decks and hulls of the 11 remaining ships. Men were crushed, drowned, or dragged from the water to become part of the grisly feast. Screams, splintering wood and falling stone transformed the once safe harbor into a pit of death. In this massacre, Odysseus's fleet, remnants of the great Trojan expedition, was utterly destroyed. Only 1 ship remained, and its crew was greatly diminished. Escape into the open sea. Odysseus, on the deck of the single surviving ship, anchored on the rocky outcrop, witnessed the horror without hesitation. Drawing his sword, he cut the anchor lines and ordered his remaining oarsmen to row with all their strength. Without turning back, they fled the cursed, blood-soaked harbor, racing toward the perilous freedom of the open sea. Alone with the last surviving vessel, Odysseus and his remaining men floated across the waves like ghosts. Their faces were frozen with the memory of friends devoured by cannibal giants. The cunning hero now paid in full the price of both his men's folly and Poseidon's curse. With only unyielding desire for Nostos and a single ship to carry him, he continued forward into the uncertain, relentless sea. He had escaped the bloody slaughter of the Laestrygonians with only a single ship, leaving behind the vast majority of his companions as victims of his own vigilance, or lack thereof, and the savage wrath of the giants. Now, the cunning hero and the handful of men who remained, carried along by the capricious winds of fate, reached a mysterious island that seemed to exist at the boundary between wisdom and madness. The island of the sorceress Circe, known as Aiaia. Aiaia lay alone in the heart of the sea, the home of a sorceress of incomparable beauty, danger, and power, the daughter of the sun god, Helios. The island was overgrown with wild forests and veiled in curling smoke that perpetually rose into the sky. It exuded a peculiar tranquility, yet beneath it lingered an unmistakable, threatening aura. Odysseus approached these new, perilous lands with a caution greater than ever before. Before confronting the island itself, Odysseus ventured alone to hunt, bringing back a mighty stag to the ship. The kill was not merely sustenance, it was a symbol of hope and renewed strength for his weary companions. The following day, he set about exploring the island, dividing the remaining men into two groups by lot. It was not Odysseus who led the doomed expedition, but Eurylochus and 22 men sent into the heart of the island for the fateful encounter. As Eurylochus's party ventured deep into the forest, they eventually came upon a gleaming, magnificent stone palace. From within emanated a delicate, enchanting song that lured them forward. Inside, Circe sat at a golden loom, weaving. The grounds around the palace were guarded by enormous lions and wolves, tamed yet previously ensnared by her magic, their human consciousness trapped within their wild forms. Though seemingly docile, these beasts were the first chilling signs of the supernatural danger that awaited. Circe, with her hypnotic beauty and feigned hospitality, invited the men inside. Driven by hunger and curiosity, they obeyed. She offered them a potion made of barley, cheese, and honeyed wine, nourishing in appearance, but infused with a potent, magical, and deadly ingredient. No sooner had they consumed it and indulged in the feast than Circe touched them with her slender, powerful wand. In that instant, a horrifying transformation took place. They were all turned into coarse, muddy pigs. Yet this was no mere bodily change. Circe had altered only their forms. The human minds of the men remained trapped within the porcine bodies, fully aware of their fear, despair, and helplessness. And, outside, Eurylochus had lingered, guided by instinctive suspicion and fear. Witnessing the scene, he froze in horror before racing back to tell Odysseus of his comrade's grim fate. The king's warning, ignored by his men, had claimed yet another brutal toll. Odysseus would not abandon his companions to this fate. He armed himself with his sword and bow, determined to rescue them. He was not only a king, but a protector of those who had survived. Along the way, at this crucial juncture of destiny, he encountered Hermes, the divine messenger, moving at the speed of light and wielding his golden staff. Hermes revealed a vital secret to Odysseus, to protect him from Circe's magic, a magical herb called moly, with a black root and a milk-white flower. Consuming it would grant him absolute immunity to her spells. The god also instructed him on the exact course of action. When offered the potion, he must drink it without fear, and when Circe raised her wand, he should draw his sword and threaten her life. Yet as a matter of divine order, if she offered herself, he must not refuse. This union would not only break the spell, but also ensure his safety, a sacred necessity ordained by the gods. Armed with moly, Odysseus entered the grand palace. Circe received him with regal splendor and immediately offered the deadly potion in a golden cup. With courage unwavering, he drank, resisting her magic as Hermes had instructed. The potion did not stupefy him, instead it fortified his body with immunity. Circe lifted her wand and spoke the incantations, but Odysseus remained unmoved. Shocked and horrified, the sorceress watched him draw his sword, ready to strike. Realizing she had met a mortal protected by the gods, Circe knelt in defeat and inquired his name and purpose. Odysseus refused her advances until she swore to restore all his men to their original human forms. Once she had given her oath, Circe performed the ritual, turning the pigs back into men. They emerged from the enchantment even younger and more handsome than before. Overcome with relief and joy, they wept and embraced their king. Odysseus and his men spent an unexpected year on the sorceress's island. Surrounded by her wealth and lavish hospitality, they regained their strength and temporarily forgot the horrors of the Laestrygonians. During this time, Circe's magic altered their perception of time. What Odysseus believed to be a few days or weeks had actually stretched into a full year, a magical lethargy that momentarily soothed their longing for home. At the end of this year, the crew, particularly the faithful yet fearful Eurylochus, reminded their king that it was time to leave. This was the mortal nudge he needed, a call to remember his ultimate goal rather than linger in temporary comfort. Circe, recognizing the unyielding strength of Odysseus's desire for Nostos, released him willingly. Yet she imparted a crucial decree. Before returning home, he must descend into the realm of the dead, Hades, to consult the spirit of the blind Theban prophet, Tiresias. Only he could reveal how to overcome Poseidon's curse and navigate the remaining trials of the journey home. Thus Circe's island became more than a place of captivity and salvation. It marked the beginning of Odysseus's voyage to seek the wisdom of the dead, a pivotal step toward reclaiming his home and fate. He had spent a full year in the enchanted palace of the sorceress Circe, surviving the peril of forgetting his Nostos, the longing for home. Now, the cunning hero stood on the threshold of his most terrifying task yet, the journey to seek the knowledge of the dead. Circe's final command had etched itself into his mind like a prophecy. To find the path home, he must cross the boundaries of the mortal world and descend into the realm of Hades to consult the spirit of the blind prophet, Tiresias of Thebes. Yet before embarking on this sacred and fearsome journey, fate revealed its small, tragic detail. One of his young companions, Elpenor, intoxicated by the effects of Circe's magic, had fallen from the roof of her palace and died. In the haste and excitement of the moment, neither Odysseus nor the crew had remembered to bury him. His spirit lingered, restless, at the gates of the underworld, and Odysseus would encounter him the moment he descended into the dark earth. In the grand epic of his voyage, this would be the first cruel meeting born of a simple oversight. Following Circe's instructions, Odysseus and his remaining men sailed to the westernmost edge of the world, beyond the ocean, until they reached the lands of the Cimmerians, a perpetually misty, sunless realm where the entrance to the land of the dead, Erebus, lay hidden. Upon stepping onto the shadowed shore, Odysseus began the sacred and terrifying rites. This was a ritual only the bravest of heroes dared undertake, a bargaining with the powers of the underworld itself. As Circe had taught, he dug a square pit and sprinkled into it the sacred liquids needed to summon and speak to the dead. First wine, then water, honey, and milk, finally covering them with white barley flour. As a sacrifice to the spirits, he slew a black ram and a black ewe, letting their blood flow into the holy pit. The blood, the fiery essence of life itself, became a magical magnet, drawing the souls from Erebus below. Before the blood could cool, countless spirits began to rise through the mist, drawn to its vitality. Brides, young bachelors, weary old men, and the shadows of heroes fallen at Troy, all surged forward, pulled by the living essence of the offering. The number of spirits was so great that even Odysseus felt a shudder in his soul. Yet he did not forget his purpose. Drawing his gleaming bronze sword, he formed a protective circle around the pit. He shouted firmly to the incoming spirits. Only the spirit of Tiresias would approach the blood. The others, denied the taste of life-giving essence, wailed in sorrow and waited impatiently around the pit. Among the first to arrive was the spirit of Elpenor. Odysseus spoke to him gently, promising to give him a proper burial upon his return. At last, drawn by the scent of the sacred blood, the wise and noble spirit of the blind prophet Tiresias approached. Drinking from the offering, the mystic began to speak, emerging from the shadows and silence. Tiresias confirmed immediately the perilous nature of Odysseus's journey home. Poseidon's wrath remained, for his son had been blinded, and this divine fury would follow every sail, every wave, relentlessly. It was a merciless affirmation that Odysseus would continue to pay the price for his hubris. The prophet revealed the critical condition for returning home. When Odysseus reached the island of Trinacia, Helios's sacred cattle must not be harmed, neither by him nor his men. These animals were inviolable. Tiresias's words were no mere prophecy. They were an ultimatum. If these creatures are harmed, he warned, all your men will die, and you alone will return aboard a foreign ship, facing great hardships. Here was the divine confirmation of the Cyclops curse, inescapable and true, yet the prophecy did not end there. Tiresias foretold that upon reaching Ithaca, Odysseus would find his palace besieged by suitors. He must slay them and cleanse his home before undertaking another journey. Carrying an oar on his shoulder, he would traverse lands unaware of the sea or salt, until a stranger would mistake his oar for a threshing tool. Only then would Poseidon's wrath finally subside, and his long suffering come to an end. After Tiresias departed, Odysseus allowed the other spirits to approach the blood. The first to appear was his mother, Anticlea, whose sorrowful eyes moved him to tears. She explained that she had died from the longing caused by his absence, a poignant testament to how Nostos consumes not only the hero, but those left behind. He then encountered Agamemnon, the great commander of the Trojan War. who recounted his tragic fate, how he was betrayed and slain by his wife Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus. His spirit was full not of grief, but suspicion and anger, warning Odysseus never to trust women lightly, an underworldly test of Odysseus's loyalty to Penelope. Next, Achilles appeared. Odysseus praised his heroism at Troy, yet Achilles replied with the epic's most profound lesson on mortality: better to live humbly as a mortal than reign among the dead. Rejecting immortal fame, he emphasized that even the simplest moments of life surpass the grandeur of eternity. Finally, the most silent and painful encounter: Ajax. Enraged and shamed that Achilles' armor had been awarded to Odysseus, he had taken his own life. Ajax approached the blood, but refused to speak, turning away into the shadows despite Odysseus's pleas, a bitter reminder of how honor and hubris can wound and immortalize a mortal soul. This descent into the underworld, the Nekia, gave Odysseus crucial knowledge for his return. It also revealed the scale of crisis awaiting at home, the value of mortality, and the meaning of loyalty. Confronted by the tragedies of the underworld, he understood that Nostos was not merely a physical journey but a spiritual purification. The dangers ahead were no longer only monsters, they were tests of his will and the discipline of his companions. Odysseus had pried open the gates of the underworld, and through the prophecy of the seer Tiresias, learned the inescapable fate of Poseidon's curse. The cunning hero returned to Circe's island from the world of shadows, burdened with that heavy and terrifying knowledge. His first task, in accordance with the promise he had made to a spirit in the underworld, was to hold a proper funeral for his ill-fated companion Elpenor, honoring the ancient laws of respect for the dead. With the ritual bringing peace to his friend's soul, he was now ready for the final and most deadly stage of his journey home. Before bidding him farewell, Circe offered Odysseus life-saving warnings about the greatest perils of the seas. These were not just shields against monsters, but against the frailties of the human spirit itself. The first and most insidious danger, as Circe had forewarned, was the irresistible lure of the Sirens. The Sirens dwelled on a rocky, treacherous island in the midst of the sea. Half human, half bird, or in some tales half fish, they were hybrid creatures whose songs were both enchanting and lethal. Their melody was unique to each listener, whispering his deepest desires and memories, an irresistible magic no mortal could resist. Any ship hearing the song would lose control, drifting toward the rocks. The result was always the same: death. Every sailor reaching the shore fell victim to that captivating voice, leaving the island's shores littered with bones, a grim reminder of their fate. Odysseus, following Circe's precise instructions, acted with the caution of a seasoned leader. He sealed his men's ears with soft, melted beeswax to prevent them from hearing the deadly song, ensuring that their will remained entirely free from the Sirens' divine enchantment. Yet Odysseus was no ordinary hero. A king not only seeking his home but knowledge and experience, he desired to hear the song himself, to understand with his own ears what made it so deadly. This insatiable thirst for understanding set him apart from heroes defined merely by physical prowess. His strength lay in Metis, cunning and wisdom. He commanded his men to bind him tightly to the ship's mast. This binding was no mere restraint. It symbolized self-control and the triumph of will. He warned them that, no matter how much he pleaded, or how forcefully he commanded, they must never release him. As they sailed past the Sirens' island, the delicate yet powerful melody reached the ship on the wind. Odysseus, hearing the alluring voice, felt it whispering all his pains, desires, and the deepest secrets of his Nostos. Agony tore through him. His will faltered completely. He screamed and begged the men to release him. His pleas were not the orders of a king, but the final desperate cries of a mortal ensnared by irresistible temptation. But his companions, their ears sealed with wax, could not hear him. They merely followed their orders. To them, their captain's writhing appeared as a fleeting madness induced by the strange melody, so they bound him more tightly to the mast. This episode stands as the greatest testament to Odysseus's self-discipline and strength of will. With wisdom, he navigated the perilous line between risking knowledge and preserving life. He alone of all mortals exposed himself to the lethal charm, yet triumphed by chaining his own will. Here intellect won not over brute force, but over the vulnerabilities of the soul. Once the Sirens' island was behind them, the men removed their wax and freed Odysseus. They watched in silent awe as their king survived the perilous test. Yet relief was short-lived, for ahead lay the greatest and most inevitable terror Circe had warned him about. He had freed himself from the deadly enchantment of the Sirens by chaining his own will. He had sealed within his soul the knowledge of seers and the dead. Now, the cunning hero and his last ship faced the greatest and most inevitable terror Circe had warned him about. Fate had driven them into a narrow strait, wedged between two monstrous forces. This was no mere sea voyage. It was the gravest test of leadership and moral choice. The channel before them was a supernatural trap, ready to swallow their ship and the remaining crew. Two jagged rocks loomed, separated by no more than the flight of an arrow, forming a narrow, dark passage. On one side, hidden in the misty, shadowed rocks of the sea, lay Scylla. She had 12 misshapen serpentine legs and 6 long snake-like necks, each crowned with a horrendous head. Each mouth was filled with 3 rows of razor-sharp teeth. This fearsome sea monster lurked in her rocky lair, stretching her 6 heads upward to snatch 6 sailors from passing ships, devouring them with terrifying swiftness. Her savagery was sudden and unavoidable. Across from her waited Charybdis, a force not of flesh but of the sea itself, a supernatural wrath of the ocean. 3 times a day, she drew immense volumes of seawater into the abyss and then expelled it with a deafening roar. Unlike Scylla, Charybdis could engulf the entire ship and all aboard, leaving nothing but fragments of wood in her furious maw. Circe had warned Odysseus that there was no surviving Charybdis. The whirlpool would swallow the ship whole. To save a single vessel, he would be forced to choose, sacrificing 6 of his men to Scylla. It was the most terrible and inevitable decision any mortal leader could make. Odysseus did not disclose Circe's prophecy fully to his crew, concealing the grim certainty that 6 men would be lost. This secrecy prevented panic and ensured that his companions rowed steadily to the last moment. Yet this knowledge became the heaviest moral burden he bore, as he directed the fate of his crew with full awareness. As they approached the strait, a monstrous roar arose. Charybdis began to draw the ocean's waters into her abyss, a torrent vanishing into an unseen chasm. The crew, horrified by the whirlpool, focused entirely on it, oblivious to the approaching disaster. At that critical moment, Scylla emerged from her lair through the mist. Her 6 long, horrifying necks reached toward the side of the ship. With terrifying precision, she seized Odysseus' 6 finest, strongest men, armor and oars included, and carried them away. The desperate cries of his companions echoed against the rocky cliffs. A horrifying scene Odysseus could witness, but could not prevent. He saw their feet swinging in the air, yet he did not draw his sword against Scylla. As a leader, Odysseus made the excruciating moral choice. He sacrificed 6 men to navigate the Straits safely. The ship and the remaining crew were pulled from the jaws of the whirlpool and the monster. This was the only path to survival for the rest of the fleet. This loss was another tangible mark of Poseidon's curse and the Cyclops' wrath. Odysseus's decision embodied the darkest aspect of leadership. Sometimes, to save the whole, a few must be sacrificed to the fury of the sea. In modern language, the dual threat of Scylla and Charybdis has become a metaphor for making 2 equally difficult or dangerous choices. Odysseus' tragedy transcends mythology, symbolizing the unavoidable choices that confront humanity in every age. He had escaped the grasp of Scylla's 6 monstrous heads at the cost of 6 companions' lives. He had narrowly avoided the ocean's swallowing whirlpool of Charybdis. The cunning hero and his remaining handful of men now stood on the threshold of the final, greatest trial. The sea carried them toward the island of Trinacia, home to the sacred herds of the sun god Helios, which the blind seer Tiresias and the sorceress Circe had warned them to avoid at all costs. The island appeared as a corner of paradise, with tranquil pastures, lush greenery, and its lonely position in the heart of the ocean. Yet the sacred animals it harbored turned this idyll into a land of lethal prohibition. Under the golden rays of the sun, dazzlingly white sheep and reddish cattle grazed peacefully on the pastures, untouchable creatures of the immortal world. As the ship drew near, Odysseus felt the weight of Tiresias' prophecy pressing upon his shoulders. The moment any of these sacred animals were harmed, he knew his entire crew would perish, and he alone would return home on a foreign vessel. He warned his men immediately. They must not approach the island, must row swiftly and continuously, and must leave without delay. But the men, exhausted and starving after escaping the Cyclops and Scylla, had reached the limit of their endurance. Faces weathered by salt and years of suffering, they were led by the stubborn, loyal, yet perpetually rebellious Eurylochus. The crew complained, arguing that their hunger and the unbearable fatigue of the journey demanded they rest on the island. Odysseus, in a final moment of desperation, felt his authority teeter under the wave of mutiny. He understood the power of fate was inescapable. Fear that his men would die from starvation, far more immediate than divine wrath, outweighed all else. In despair, he allowed the ship to anchor in a sheltered cove of the island, exacting from his crew the most sacred oath, before all gods, that they would touch nothing of Helios's cattle. Yet Poseidon's curse had not ended. No sooner had the ship been moored than the skies unleashed a violent storm. For an entire month, wind and waves prevented the vessel from leaving. Provisions ran out swiftly, and the agony of hunger became a force capable of shattering human will and sacred vows. In the depths of desperation, Odysseus ventured alone into the island's interior, seeking the gods' guidance and the fate of their journey. There, overcome by divine will, he fell into an irresistible sleep. the most critical, helpless, and vulnerable moment of his heroic tale. While he slept, the whisper of evil seeped into the minds of his undisciplined crew. Eurylochus reignited their mutiny, convincing them with simple and perilous logic. To die of hunger, he argued, is far worse and more wretched than the wrath of the gods. Driven mad by hunger and despair, the men broke their oath and defied sacred law. They seized the finest of Helios's gleaming sacred herds, slaughtered them, and cooked the forbidden meat. Smoke from the sacrilegious feast rose swiftly toward Olympus, the spirit of the innocent animals ascending in a furious cry. Helios immediately learned of the desecration. His wrath burned hotter than the sun itself. He went directly to Olympus to complain to Zeus, warning that if vengeance were not taken, he would withdraw his light from the world and descend into the realm of the dead, threatening the order of the cosmos. Zeus, understanding the necessity of preserving the inviolability of the sacred herds, promised retribution. The heroes would sail once more, and the curse would be fulfilled. When the storm finally subsided, Odysseus awoke and returned to the ship. He saw the remaining crew, sated yet ashamed, silent with guilt, and immediately understood what had transpired. But it was too late. With the final gust of fate, they set sail into the open sea. Once in the deep waters, Zeus kept his word. The sky darkened, the seas rose in fury, and a blazing, roaring thunderbolt struck the ship. Masts, planks, ropes, and all remaining crew were shattered and swept away in the storm's grasp. All perished but Odysseus. Poseidon's curse had been fulfilled entirely. He would return home alone aboard a foreign vessel, bereft of all companions. Summoning his last strength, he clutched the broken remnants of the ship, bracing himself against the wreckage, and was swept toward the cursed Charybdis. Miraculously, he escaped the maw of the whirlpool at the last moment, catching hold of the branches of a fig tree and surviving. Alone, the accumulated grief of 12 years of the epic reached its peak. He realized that Poseidon's curse had come to pass, and that all his faithful companions were lost. No longer the king of a mighty fleet of 12 ships, he was now but a solitary fragment of wood upon the sea. Carried by the ocean currents, he drifted for days and nights, unconscious, at the mercy of the seas, until fate guided him to the isle of the beautiful nymph Calypso, where, in the midst of the endless blue, he would be held captive, and his return, his Nostos, would be delayed for 7 more years in inevitable sorrowful exile. He had lost all his companions. He had spent 7 long years in the sweet captivity of the beautiful nymph Calypso on the Isle of Aiaia, surrounded by the endless blue expanse of the sea. At last, by the decree of Zeus, the cunning hero was freed, confronted Poseidon's wrath one final time, and arrived at the island of the Phaeacians, Scheria, where he witnessed the highest form of Xenia humanity could offer. In the grand hall of the Phaeacians, he recounted the full tale of his 20 years of suffering. Now, his outward adventures were over. Only one battle remained, the fight to reclaim his home. After captivating the Phaeacians with the depth and anguish of his story, they honored their promise, providing him with abundant treasures, valuable gifts, and a safe escort. On the deck of the final, trustworthy Phaeacian ship, Odysseus fell into a deep, peaceful sleep, a sleep profound enough to wash away the exhaustion of 10 years of war and 10 years of sea. Yet Poseidon, lord of the oceans, would not overlook this. Though the curse had fully played out, Odysseus had lost all his companions. The Phaeacians' easy and generous aid was an affront to his divine wrath. In fury, Poseidon appealed to Zeus. The king of the gods agreed that the Phaeacians must be taught a lesson. The ship carrying Odysseus, at the very height of its triumph and close to the shore, was to be turned to stone. As the Phaeacian ship joyfully returned to its harbor, leaving Odysseus asleep upon it, Poseidon enacted his dreadful punishment. Suddenly, the vessel transformed from a living, moving entity into cold, immobile stone. The prow, the masts, the rows of oars, all stiffened in an instant and became rooted into the earth. The Phaeacians, gazing at the petrified ship, understood the gods had punished them, and from that day forward, they never escorted strangers again. They had learned the limits of the sacred law of Xenia against divine wrath. At last Odysseus awoke on the familiar shores of Ithaca, yet he did not recognize his homeland. Athena, the great cunning goddess, had shrouded everything in thick, murky mist to conceal him. Confused and suspicious, he scanned his surroundings. Had the Phaeacians betrayed him? Had they left him on some unknown foreign isle? His weary, cautious heart carried the sharp sting of momentary dissatisfaction and solitude. At that moment, Athena, disguised in the guise most fitting for her purpose, approached him as a slender, elegant shepherd. Odysseus, true to his cunning, did not reveal his identity, even to the goddess. He spun a tale of a battle-worn Cretan soldier, escaped from peril, and Athena, appreciating his prudence and cleverness, finally shed her disguise and revealed her radiant, majestic form. Recognizing her immediately, Odysseus poured out the accumulated resentment of 20 years. "O sacred goddess, you who have watched over me, why did you abandon me for 20 long years?" Athena answered calmly that she had avoided direct intervention due to Poseidon's wrath, though she had always observed him from afar. Most importantly, she emphasized her trust in Odysseus's cunning, Metis, declaring it his greatest weapon. The perils of returning home had now begun. Athena warned him to disguise himself as a beggar, instead of heading straight to the hall where the suitors gathered. This was not merely concealment, but a strategy to test the loyalty of his people and companions, to scrutinize his enemies from within, and to prepare for the ultimate reckoning. With a divine touch, Athena transformed the glorious king into the appearance of a decrepit, hideous, loathsome beggar. His youthful, muscular body became wrinkled, his golden hair fell away, his eyes clouded, and he was clad in filthy, patched garments. The great hero was now reduced to the most wretched mortal. Athena then guided him to his first step, the hut of the loyal swineherd Eumaeus. Meanwhile, she dispatched Telemachus to return from Sparta, setting father and son on the path to reunion. Bearing the burden of his disguise, Odysseus reached Eumaeus's hut. The faithful swineherd, unaware of the beggar's true identity, welcomed him in accordance with the sacred laws of hospitality. He offered food and wine. Eumaeus recounted the state of his household, the suitor's audacity, Queen Penelope's endless mourning, and above all, the deep 10-year grief he felt over the loss of his beloved master. His tears were not only those of a servant, but of the last remaining loyalty of Ithaca itself. Odysseus, in the guise of a beggar, shared his fabricated Cretan identity with Eumaeus. claiming that Odysseus would soon return, speaking with the firmness of a divine oath. Eumaeus, having heard many lies and false tidings, did not believe him. Yet he courteously scolded the beggar and maintained his hospitality, knowing that one day his master too might return to his door as a helpless stranger. Seated in the dim light of the hut, Odysseus felt the bitter ache of being a stranger in his own home, and the consolation brought by the unwavering, pure loyalty of his faithful companion. The final test had begun. He had weathered 20 years of sea and divine wrath. He had concealed himself beneath the face of a beggar in his own house. The cunning hero was now preparing for the final test of his fate. The first step of that test was set in motion by Athena's divine will. The goddess secretly and swiftly brought young Telemachus back to Ithaca from Sparta, where he had been searching for his father, and sent him straight to the humble swineherd Eumaeus's hut. Telemachus returned from that dangerous quest, not only armed with information, but with a growing confidence. Before leaving Sparta, he had taken with him Theoclymenus, a learned seer from Argos, who along the way read an omen in the flight of a bird, and prophesied that Odysseus's house would endure, and that his noble rule in Ithaca would soon be restored. That prophecy filled the young prince's heart with hope. Before heading home, Telemachus sent a man to the palace to notify his mother, Penelope, and then arrived at Eumaeus's hut. The faithful swineherd greeted the prince with the joy of a man who had seen his own son returned. He embraced him with tears of longing. Father and son sat under the same roof without recognizing one another. Telemachus immediately asked who the old beggar in the hut was. Eumaeus told him the stranger was a Cretan wanderer, a fugitive traveler with a noble past. Although Telemachus knew the laws of hospitality, he spoke the painful truth. He could not bring the stranger into the hall, for the suitor's insolence knew no bounds, and they would treat him badly. Those words showed Odysseus, still disguised, once more how grave the situation in his house had become. As Eumaeus set off toward the palace to deliver the news, father and son remained alone in the hut. The moment was perfect for divine timing. Athena appeared then at the doorway in a form visible only to Odysseus. She told him that the time had come to reveal his true identity. With her smiling cunning, she touched him with her magic wand. At Athena's powerful touch, the old ugly beggar's disguise dissolved into the air. In its place stood a younger, handsome, strong, and graceful man bearing the old royal splendor. His filthy rags were instantly transformed into a well-cut, fresh cloak. He stood before his son as the real Odysseus he had been 17 years earlier. Telemachus recoiled in shock at the sudden miraculous change. He thought his father a god. That a mortal could assume such an appearance so abruptly was beyond belief. "You are a god," he said, "and I suppose you have come to torment me." Odysseus, with the bittersweet smile born of 20 years of longing, told him the truth. "No, I am no god," he said. "I am your father, Odysseus, the one you have longed for, and will free you from the suitors." At that instant, the separations of 2 decades, the pains of war and sea converged into a single point. Telemachus abandoned his doubts and embraced his father with joy. For a long while, they wept together in the dim light of the swineherd's hut. It was one of the most moving moments of the tale. More than the triumph of brute force, it was the triumph of family bonds and the fulfillment of Nostos. When the tender moment passed, The cunning hero's royal mind returned at once. Father and son immediately turned to the pressing life and death matter of how to take vengeance on the suitors. Telemachus voiced his worry at once, fearing the suitors' great numbers, 108 men plus their attendants, and asked how they could possibly fight such a crowd. Odysseus calmed him with unshakable resolve. Looking to the sky, he asked, "Will not Zeus and Athena be sufficient allies for us, my son?" This was not merely a question, but a declaration that divine protection and fate stood with them. Their plan was built on secrecy, cunning, and precise timing. Odysseus would go to the hall the next morning again in the garb of a beggar. This was vital for observing the enemy from within and seeing every face for what it truly was. Telemachus would, at his father's signal, gather all the weapons and armor in the house and hide them in a strong storeroom. He would invent an excuse for removing the arms, claiming that smoke had rusted them, and, more importantly, that they were being taken away for safekeeping, so the suitors would not start brawls while drunk. They would leave only 2 spears, 2 swords, and 2 shields available, enough to avoid being utterly defenseless in case of a sudden attack. Most crucially, this secret would be kept from everyone. Penelope, Laertes, Eumaeus, and the other servants would not be told. A plan unknown to others is a plan unlikely to be undone. Telemachus accepted his father's counsel and strategy. He had ceased to be a child. Standing at his father's side, he had become a warrior. The final bloody stage of their path to vengeance had begun. Our hero bore the weight of 20 years of longing on his shoulders. He slipped into his own home in the guise of the lowliest mortal, wearing the face of a beggar. After forging that sacred alliance with his son, the cunning hero advanced toward the theater of the final reckoning. The next morning, young Telemachus, following his father's instructions, returned to the palace before anyone else, carrying the heavy burden of a great secret and hope upon his shoulders. Then, accompanied by Odysseus, still cloaked in the beggar's rags, and the loyal swineherd Eumaeus, they traversed the old dusty paths toward the city of Ithaca. On the road, fate's sharp hand brought them face to face with Melanthius, the arrogant and treacherous goatherd in the service of the suitors. Melanthius had eaten the bread of his master, yet betrayed his king. Seeing Odysseus in his filthy, repulsive guise, he approached with vile insolence. He kicked the old man aside, and every word he spat was a poisonous insult, commanding the aged stranger to keep away from the palace or face the blow. Beneath the tattered rags, Odysseus burned with the unyielding rage of a king. In that instant, he could have shattered the insolent goatherd with a single blow, yet the secrecy of the plan and his oath to Athena restrained his hand. He swallowed the relentless anger and bore Melanthius's insults in silence. This was one of the hardest victories of his journey home, the triumph of controlled wrath. Odysseus and Eumaeus left Melanthius behind and entered the palace's wide marble courtyard. There, under the sun, atop a heap of filth, lay an old, neglected, and exhausted dog. It was none other than Argos, the magnificent hound Odysseus had trained for hunting 20 years before. Argos lay in the dust and filth of the courtyard, his body wasted with age, his spirit burning with 2 decades of longing. Yet those clouded, aged eyes recognized the voice and familiar stride of his master in the beggar's guise. The dog tried to wag his tail, lift his ears and approach, but 20 years of waiting had drained his strength. He had no power left to run to his beloved master. Seeing his loyal companion thus, Odysseus turned away to hide the deep anguish stabbing his heart. As a beggar, he could not weep. He quietly wiped away a single tear from his eye. In that moment, Argos reached the end of his 20-year vigil. He had seen his master return, and having recognized him, he exhaled for the last time and died. This was the purest and most tragic symbol of loyalty in Ithaca. Argos's death marked the passing of honor and devotion within the decayed walls of the palace. In the depths of his soul, Odysseus renewed the oath of vengeance once more. Sorrow weighing upon him, Odysseus entered the grand, ostentatious hall of the palace. The suitors feasted upon the king's wealth with arrogance and extravagance. In the guise of a beggar, Odysseus, under Athena's guidance, tested the rules of hospitality, begging in turn from each suitor. But the hearts of the suitors were hardened with greed. Not one offered aid. Antinous, the most insolent and reckless of them all, grew enraged at the beggar's presence and hurled insults at Eumaeus, scolding the swineherd for bringing an unwanted stranger into the palace. Odysseus confronted him, pointing out that he had violated the sacred laws of hospitality and insulted the master of the house. Antinous' pride reached its peak. He seized a small stool and hurled it at Odysseus with all his might. The strike struck the hero on the shoulder or back, yet Odysseus absorbed it without pain, his body hardened by years of toil and the aid of a god. He did not budge, a rock unshaken. In a corner, Telemachus watched, fury swelling in his chest, yet he swallowed it, recalling the plan he had devised with his father. That single moment of restraint was the greatest tribute to his father's honor. Later in the afternoon, another beggar appeared, fat and boisterous, named Iris. He prided himself on being the sole beggar of the palace and sought to drive away the newcomer. The suitors, bored, watched the clash as entertainment. Antinous promised a sausage to the victor. Odysseus saw the fight as a chance to gauge the suitor's true nature and to reveal his own concealed strength. He removed his ragged belt, displaying the sinews of his body, and Athena granted him extra might. Beneath the old beggar's clothing, the power and grandeur of the hero emerged suddenly. The suitors recoiled in astonishment. When the fight began, Odysseus felled Iris with a single swift punch. The man's neck broke and he collapsed. The suitors could not hide their amazement and offered Odysseus a mixture of mockery and respect. That night, the hero claimed his first victory in the palace. As night fell, Queen Penelope, noble and sorrowful, sought to speak with the weary stranger. She questioned him about her husband, Odysseus, and he navigated the delicate line between truth and falsehood with practiced subtlety. Afterward, she commanded her aged and loyal nurse Eurycleia to wash the traveler's feet. Eurycleia, who loved her master more deeply than anyone, touched his leg and discovered the famous scar. It had been carved during a wild boar hunt in his youth when he visited his grandfather Autolycus. The mark stood as a tangible and unchangeable testament to that epic moment. Eurycleia froze in shock, nearly toppling the water basin and crying out with joy. She grasped his hand and kissed it, tears streaming. Odysseus, moved by his son's earlier tears, sprang forward, silencing the nurse and warning her to guard the secret. Should the day of vengeance arrive, he could not spare anyone, not even her. Eurycleia, hearing the authority in his voice and the gravity of vengeance, immediately yielded. The secret was now sealed within the heart of the most loyal servant of the king. That day, within the palace walls, betrayal, immortal loyalty, and the peril of revelation intertwined to make the tensest day the hall had ever known. He had slipped into his own palace 20 years later. He had seen in Argos's final breath and Euryclea's tears once more the meaning of loyalty. The cunning hero now moved toward the final, crucial stage of his plan for vengeance, a stage that would determine not only the fate of the suitors, but also in a way the destiny of Queen Penelope herself. Night fell, and when Penelope retired to her chamber to sleep, the critical moment for Odysseus and Telemachus had arrived. Only the palace corridors were lit by the mysterious, divine glow of Athena. The goddess, in her silence and invisibility, aided father and son. They moved swiftly and quietly as agreed, and hid all the weapons and armor, the swords, spears, and shields in the storage room. This first and most vital step was designed to leave the suitors defenseless when the bloody reckoning came. The next morning, if the suitors inquired about the weapons, Telemachus had a ready excuse. He would claim that they had been removed because they had rusted from smoke and to prevent drunken men from killing one another. It was a clever lie, believable and crafted to exploit the suitors' own recklessness. The following day, Penelope descended into the grand and honorable hall. 20 years of patience and cunning had reached their end. She announced that she would test the suitors and that a choice must finally be made. But this was no ordinary contest. She declared that she would award her hand to the man who could string Odysseus's mighty bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads set in a row. It was deliberately an impossible task. She knew that no man alive but her husband could string the bow. Whoever succeeded would leave Ithaca with her. It was not surrender, but a final, dangerous game played to ensure her husband's return. Penelope commanded the faithful Eumaeus to bring forth the sacred bow and the 12 axes, carefully arranged like the beams of a ship, reflecting Odysseus's identity as a sailor. The contest began. Young Telemachus, eager to prove his own strength and filial respect, attempted the task first. He tried 3 times, preparing to string the bow on the 4th, but his father, Odysseus in disguise, caught his gaze with a sharp, commanding look. The young man understood instantly and stopped, loudly declaring that he lacked the strength. He let the bow fall. This was part of the plan, for if he had succeeded, the suitors' horror would have fallen upon him immediately. Then the suitors attempted it. They first warmed the bow with wax and fire, trying to bend it, but the royal bow had been made for Odysseus's legendary strength. None could move it. Even Eurymachus, boldest and strongest among them, strained with all his might but failed. In frustration, he muttered fears of shame should word spread that they had been bested by a stranger. Their pride could not bear defeat. In that moment of chaos and despair, Odysseus, still in his beggar guise, revealed himself. He moved outside to meet his most faithful allies, the swineherd Eumaeus and the cowherd Phaeacian. These men had believed in his cause from the beginning and had shown the purest loyalty. Stripping off the beggar's cloak, he revealed the famous scar on his leg, a wound from a wild boar hunt in his youth, the singular proof of his unchanging identity, witnessed by Euryclea. He revealed his true self and promised reward to those who aided his plan. The 2 men, overcome with tears and joy, submitted immediately to their king's command. Then Odysseus returned to the hall and, still in disguise, begged to try the bow. The suitors erupted in anger, but Penelope permitted it. This was her final move, her last hope. Amid the gathering chaos, Odysseus gave his last vital orders to Eumaeus and Phaeacian. Lock the female servants inside, particularly those who had been disloyal, and secure every outer door. No one was to escape, no one was to summon aid. The king's bow now lay ready, alone in the hall with only a handful of the faithful present, surrounded by the arrogant suitors, waiting for the final stage of that sacred vengeance to begin. For 20 years, the royal bow had been kept beyond the reach of foreign and filthy hands. Now, amid the ruins of his home, the man hidden beneath the worn, ragged guise of a beggar, our cunning hero, Odysseus, slipped silently through the hall among the suitors, their faces etched with despair. The moment to take up the legendary bow was the instant when fate's final invisible string was pulled taut. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath in that decisive, inevitable moment. Time itself appeared frozen upon the marble floor. When Odysseus gripped the bow, the strong, horn-crafted weapon came alive as though it were a loyal friend, patiently awaiting its master's touch for 20 long years. Its surface, marked by age and the wear of countless hands, seemed to vibrate beneath his fingers. The haughty army of suitors harbored not a single fragment of belief that the frail, elderly beggar could even attempt the task. Their faces were fixed in scornful derision and weary disbelief. Yet as Odysseus lifted the bow, his expression betrayed not mockery, but the serene certainty of victory, the quiet of 20 years of longing finally fulfilled. The bowstring yielded slowly to the measured, unwavering strength of his seasoned muscles. The sound that emerged was neither the grunt of effort nor the strain of aged wood. It was a clear, long, crystalline note that struck the heart of the hall, the last breath taken before an arrow's release. Outside, the sky split with the voice of Zeus. Thunder echoed from Ithaca's hills like a powerful prophetic seal. That ringing was the victory song of the bow in the hands of a beggar. The arrogant laughter of the suitors was forever silenced beneath the will of the heavens. He drew the bow effortlessly. It was so natural, so light, that the act was like a master bard tuning a magnificent lyre, placing a new string with gentle ease. The sound, rich and pure, pierced the hall like a sword. At that moment, Zeus, with a roar that tore the sky, proclaimed Odysseus's triumph, a divine affirmation, an unmistakable declaration that the King of Gods stood with him. The suitors felt the dread of what was to come sink into their hearts. Odysseus took an arrow, drew his aim, and the shaft passed flawlessly through the gaps of the 12 axe heads, a symbol of 20 years of longing, rage, and justice. The arrow struck the far wall. He let the bow fall, and shedding the beggar's ragged disguise as one might discard worn cloth, revealed the majesty of a king and the weight of 20 years of pent-up fury. In the center of the hall, in full view of hundreds of terrified eyes, he laid down a bag of weapons, swords, spears, and arrows before his feet. The first arrow he loosed struck Antinous, the boldest, cruelest, and most arrogant of the suitors. Antinous, mid-sip from a delicate two-handled wine cup, was pierced through the throat. He collapsed, cup and all, spilling wine alongside his blood across the floor. Pride, cruelty, and ingratitude had paid their first and most merciless price. The suitors screamed in shock, terror, and panic. Their weapons were gone, the doors were locked. Odysseus raised his voice deep and commanding. "Dogs! You who devoured my house, sought my wife, and would have slain my son, you will die. For you, a feast of blood awaits." In an instant, the hall became a battlefield. Odysseus, Telemachus, Eumaeus, and Phaeacian held the narrow entrances, forming a sharp line against the numerically superior enemy. Odysseus's arrows flew like whispers of death. The suitors, unarmed, hurled tables, chairs, and stools in a desperate flurry. Chaos reigned. At that moment, the traitorous Melanthius attempted to steal weapons from the storage and arm the suitors, but Eumaeus and Phaeacian caught him. They bound him mercilessly and suspended him from a beam, exacting the full measure of his vile betrayal. In the fiercest and most desperate hour of battle, Athena appeared beside Odysseus, disguised as Mentor. She bolstered his courage and watched the flow of combat. When the moment was right, she discarded her disguise and unleashed her fearsome, gleaming aegis, the serpent-headed shield of Zeus. Its terrifying, radiant presence struck the hearts of the suitors. Their resolve shattered. They realized that they were not fighting mere men, but divine wrath itself. With Athena's aid, the battle ended in complete and decisive victory. Odysseus and his 3 loyal allies slew every suitor. Soon, the magnificent hall was filled with corpses and a deep red river of their blood. The scent of blood, wine, and pride mingled thick in the air. When the slaughter ended, Euryclea, the faithful old nurse, came to witness the grim scene. She was about to cry out in joy, but Odysseus restrained her. This was not a moment for celebration. It was a moment for justice and cleansing. He tasked Euryclea with identifying the disloyal servants who had conspired with the suitors against their king and queen. With a bitter expression, she named 12 women. These traitors were now assigned their final, degrading duty to clean the hall and remove the corpses of the suitors. Once the cleaning was complete, Telemachus, now a hardened young prince, ordered the women executed. They were bound with a ship's rope and hanged, their betrayal paid for with their lives. Melanthius, too, suffered the heaviest punishment. Tortured, his nose and ears cut off, he died in agony. Finally, Odysseus filled the grand hall with smoke and fire, eradicating the stench of blood and all traces of treachery. The house was purified, not only physically but symbolically, restored to its rightful king and the gods. Order had returned to the palace, enforced with bloody justice. Odysseus had cleansed his home with the blood of the suitors, burned away treachery with the smoke of brimstone. Now, the cunning hero stood on the threshold of the most challenging trial yet, one that would test him after 20 long years, the trial of reclaiming his wife's heart. Euryclea, the loyal aged nurse, slipped across the floor, breathless with joy, and ran to Queen Penelope in her high chamber, woven with grief. Tears and laughter mingled in her voice as she told the queen that her husband had returned and had slain the arrogant, greedy suitors. Yet Penelope, noble in her caution and shaped by 20 years of sorrow, met the news with an astonishing coldness. She did not immediately believe it. She had endured so many false reports, so many lying prophets, that her heart had grown into an armor of suspicion. She thought this might be a massacre, executed by a god to punish a mortal, or vengeance taken by someone else. Even if her husband had returned, she reasoned, time and suffering might have rendered him unrecognizable. When Odysseus entered the hall, now cleared of smoke and blood, Penelope still sat upon her throne, regarding him with a measured, skeptical gaze. She neither rushed into his arms nor wept, nor reproached him. She simply watched. Odysseus bristled at this distance. He had endured so much, faced countless perils, and now his own wife regarded him as a stranger. Telemachus, angered by his mother's coldness, approached him, but Penelope's wisdom would not allow her to skip this final test. She had prayed for her husband's return, but she knew the games of Poseidon, the god of pride and deceit, could still persist. In her soft, deliberate voice, she gave Eurycleia the most fearsome command of all. "Eurycleia, go. Bring my private bed from that old outer room and set up a movable bed here. Spread over it the finest furs and wool." This was her decision to test her husband. If this man were a fraud or a god in disguise, Penelope's command would expose him. When Odysseus heard this, he froze as if carved from stone, filled with a divine wrath surpassing 20 years of pent-up fury. It was impossible to move the bed. His voice, carrying the pride and skill of the young king he had been 20 years prior, thundered, "Woman, no one can move that bed. It is not a movable object made by mortal hands. I made it with my own hands, and it is rooted in the foundation of this house. One of its posts comes from the thick trunk of a living olive tree that grows in the center of the courtyard." He recounted the intimate, concrete detail. He had first cut the upper branches, carefully carved the trunk, and crafted the sturdy foundation of a 4-post bed. Then he had built the room's walls around this living trunk. The bed was rooted deeply in Ithaca's soil, in the very foundations of the royal household. It was not movable. It was eternal. This secret, this unchanging detail, shattered 20 years of doubt. Only he, Penelope, and a single loyal servant had ever known it. When Ulysses revealed the bed's construction, the intimate, irrefutable proof of their shared life, Penelope's doubt vanished. No god or impostor could know this secret, the physical evidence of their most private life. In that instant, freed from suspicion and the trauma of 2 decades, she let out a sharp, heartfelt cry, as though a great weight had lifted from her shoulders. She ran to her husband, tears streaming, and embraced the aged, battered figure. It was the most epic reunion of the epic, the victory of love after 20 years of separation. Their tears were bitterer than the salt of the seas, yet sweeter than the triumph of love itself. The goddess Athena, preserving the sacredness of the moment, held back the dawn's light, granting them extra time to reunite and quench their longing. After this sacred reunion, Ulysses shared with his wife the prophecy of Tiresias. The journey was not yet over. A new trial awaited him. He must one day set out again, carrying an oar across lands unknown to the sea. Yet for now a more immediate danger loomed. The families of the slain suitors would surely seek revenge for the deaths of their sons and brothers. Ulysses instructed Penelope once more to employ her cunning. Before the suitors' families learned of the massacre, she was to pretend the palace was alive with sleep, music, and celebration, the sound of a wedding feast. The music and laughter would convince any spies outside that the queen had finally remarried, buying time until their final reckoning. That night the king and queen lay together upon their bed, rooted in the ancient olive tree, whispering of the 20-year separation and the perils of the new future, and at last found peace. The story of the king who brought down Troy, who overcame the wrath of the gods to achieve the greatest triumph of human intellect, continues to resonate even after the bloody hall has been cleansed, and he has found peace in the bed rooted in the ancient olive tree. The Odyssey is far more than a journey. It is the literary, moral, and archetypal legacy that Homer has left to us. Odysseus's story crystallizes the archetype of the hero's journey, which forms the foundation of Western literature and narrative tradition. He ventures into the unknown, passes countless trials, descends to the realm of the dead, returns with knowledge, and ultimately regains not only his home but also himself. This epic journey has echoed beyond the pages of scholars' works. James Joyce's monumental Ulysses, set on the seemingly ordinary day of Bloomsday, transports Odysseus's heroic adventure into the streets of Dublin, demonstrating that the archetype remains alive in contemporary form. Odysseus's character, unlike heroes such as Achilles or Ajax who rely on sheer physical strength, is defined by intellect, cunning, and craft, Metis. Where brute force fails, he wields his mind as his greatest weapon, blinding the Cyclops, devising the Trojan horse. In this way, the epic becomes a universal metaphor for the individual's quest for self-knowledge and the pursuit of understanding. The authorship and geography of the epic have sparked some of the most striking debates in modern scholarship. Samuel Butler, in his 1897 work The Authoress of the Odyssey, proposed one of the most audacious theories, that the Odyssey was not written by Homer, but by a young woman living in Trapani, Sicily. According to Butler, the poet drew inspiration from her surroundings, modeling Ithaca on the islands near Trapani, such as Marettimo. The author, he suggested, inserted herself into the story under the guise of the clever and delicate Princess Nausicaa. The epic addresses universal themes of morality, justice, and fate, leaving metaphorical expressions that resonate even today. Scylla and Charybdis have become a metaphor for a dilemma in which one must choose between two equally perilous options. The persistent theme of hospitality, Xenia, illustrates how a society treats strangers and reveals its true values. Odysseus' story forms one of the most fundamental archetypal connections shaping modern Western philosophy and psychology. In the modern age, he is seen as a precursor of the Enlightenment individual and instrumental reason. His journey represents mastery over nature, reducing challenges to survival and pragmatic advantage. Confronting supernatural beings, Circe, the Sirens, the Cyclops, he battles chaos and the unknown. He legitimizes cleverness and cunning as means to achieve his ends, rather than being guided primarily by emotion or morality. His encounter with the Sirens, for instance, can be read in modern psychological terms as a metaphor for confronting one's inner struggles, irresistible desires, and the journey towards self-liberation. He listens to these desires, yet binds himself, exercising self-control. This parallels modern psychological approaches, exploring the conflict between ego and ID. In this sense, Odysseus becomes the first great archetype of the modern Western intellect, one who confronts the inner world, imposes order through reason and will, and transforms chaos into structure. The Odyssey is not merely an ancient tale, but a timeless work that shapes Western culture's valuation of individualism, the power of intellect, and the pursuit of knowledge. I hope this ancient epic has been a beautiful story to close your day. I look forward to your thoughts and requests. Don't forget to follow my channel. Love.